This is Creepy and Geeky, a part of the Morbidly Beautiful Podcast Network. Welcome to Creepy and Geeky. I'm your host, Robert, and today's episode is the finale of the Infinity Saga with Avengers Endgame. Joining me for this episode is returning guest Hugh McStay. Hugh is a horror writer and a critic for the Independent Horror Society, and he's the co-host of two great podcasts that I've had the honor of being on as a guest, Vampire Videos and Podcast-616. Welcome back to the show, Hugh.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back, Robert. I have been giddy all day thinking about talking about this film. Even when I was writing my notes earlier, I was getting goosebumps thinking about how much I love this movie. So thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. No, we're going to have a fun conversation because this is one of my favorites also from the MCU. This one is straight up the culmination of over 10 years, I guess 12 years of storytelling that began with Iron Man back in 2008. And it's wild to think that they managed to pull this off the way they did. They basically recreated what they do in the comic books, where they have the characters crossing over and these big wild epic storylines. So it's so insane that they managed to pull something off like this in the world of film, where it's been unheard of before and since. Multiple studios have tried to replicate what Marvel has done, and not a single one of them has been able to figure out how to do it, because they all try to rush it. I think that's the main issue, is they all try to just go, okay, well, we need our Avengers now, remembering that Marvel built up to that first Avengers movie, and faltered quite a bit along the way. But yeah, no, go ahead and give me your take on it.
I described this movie so many times on my podcast 616 as a magic trick, and I stand by that every time I go back to it. It shouldn't work, should it? Like, when you write it down on paper, like trying to squeeze in, as you said, 12 years worth of plot lines, resolution, character arcs, fan service, everything. It shouldn't work. It should be an absolute bloated mess of a film. And I mean, clocking in at 3 hours, it's a long movie, right? And it asks a lot of the audience to kind of stay with it, but it's magnificent. Probably my favorite Marvel film. It kind of fluctuates. There's like 3 or 4 that kind of like rotate around. But everything we think about Endgame, it always just jumps back up to the top. And if I'm honest, Robert, it's given me probably I'm going to say probably the best experience I've ever had in a cinema. It just sheer joy and delight in everything that this film brings to me. It's everything I could have asked for as a fan of this universe, and as a childhood fan of Marvel growing up. It's got everything that you could want. It's a great heist movie. It starts off as a really dark character piece as well. It's fantastic. I mentioned, I said earlier, fan service, and I mean that in the most positive way imaginable.
Right.
Because I've seen movies I've seen Star Wars. I'm looking at you, who give in to kind of like fan pressure and do things. Oh, the fans want this. The fans like. With this movie, it pays off things that the fans have kind of been thinking about for years, that's kind of been hanging in the background. Little moments in films that you may have missed unless you're one of these devoted fans like we are, who just lap this stuff up. You may miss a lot of it, but it just pays off in such a delightful way. There's a joy about the way in which the characters interact with each other, and it's just packed with everything. It's got a little bit of everything for a little bit of everybody. And as I said, it shouldn't work, but it absolutely does.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, this movie shouldn't work. And I agree with you about the fan service. And there's a different thing between, like you said, between doing fan service and doing fan pressure. And I think I think Star Wars is figuring it out. I think that, and it's a whole other podcast, but and it's kind of the one I'm doing with my son. But it's his podcast that'll be coming out. But it's what Star Wars did in the beginning with the sequels was what they did with the sequel trilogy was not the best. And but I argue that what they've been doing on the Disney Plus shows has been a lot better, where they've fully embraced the history and giving fans kind of what they want, but also not what they want. Doing kind of what Marvel does best in terms of doing that fan service, where you give the fans that culmination. Yeah, there are things in this movie that we waited more than a decade for. And just you wait that whole time, and you're ready for we'll get to it, but we'll tease it. But when Cap says that line, that was something they kept teasing, and you were like, oh, he's gonna say it. No, he's not gonna say it. And then and they did it at the perfect right moment. And it made sense to do it at that moment. And
I mean, it's like Joss Whedon said. I mean, I know he's a bit of a persona non grata these days, understandably so. But I always buy into what he said, which was give the audience what they need, not what they want. And I don't think that there's any more apt examples of a lot of the stuff that goes on here. It's not about paying something off because somebody desperately wants it, but it's a bit of there's some catharsis in getting these releases out. And like you said. Right. The bravery to hold back on some of these moments until we get here is very bold as well, because a lesser studio or a studio without a direction or without a compass may have absolutely spaffed their way through all of these moments before we got to the big finale. But the MCU kind of held its nerve. They gave us tons of great, enjoyable things all the way up to this finale. But then, this movie is just it's like a love letter to the MCU, this film. And I mean, even features a sort of like a valedictory lap of honor as it goes through its own past, to kind of celebrate how great it is. And there are so few franchises that can do that, because it's not just about having the volume of back catalogue, which the MCU has, it's having quality that you want to return to. And like, there are very few films in the MCU, well, especially in the Infinity Saga, very few that I don't really enjoy, or at the very least think are okay. That's the worst I'll give you. There's the worst film in the MCU, phase 1 through 3. The very worst film you would say is still okay. It's not great. It's okay. Yeah. But some of the high points are like nothing that blockbuster cinema's seen before, I don't think. And I think Marvel are finding to their cost, it's difficult to find again. It's very hard to replicate what they built. But, we're still in the early stages of this next phase. I still think there's a long way to go.
I think it's interesting too, because they hit the highest note with this, and it's hard to replicate what they did. And the problem is that I think that audiences are wanting everything to be an end game now. And I think that's what the audiences aren't realizing, is that we're not going to get that again for a little bit. That's Secret Wars. That's that we need to build back up to that. We need to have these moments where, in phase 4, phase 5, where you're going to have these up and down moments, where you're going to have these movies that don't quite connect, because they're laying some seeds there.
Also there's the pandemic as well, though, Robert. It's like people forget, it's like that we would be further along in the chain by now. It's like, I think the Kang Dynasty was meant to be coming out next year, like originally, wasn't it? Like late next year, and now obviously we're not going to get anywhere near that for a good number of years yet. And I think that is the problem, because I do think they should have had an Avengers movie by now, because I think people need that sort of like that thing to build towards, and I think that's been missing.
Secret Invasion should have been an Avengers movie. That's absolutely, exactly. And I'm going to get there, but it's that's absolutely what should have happened. And that should not have been relegated to a small, very tight mini series that didn't have broader stakes. It should have definitely had a lot more stakes to it. And it should have been a movie that had been built up to. But and I think that they've made some mistakes in terms of I I know that there's a lot of people who criticize the amount of stuff that they put out post Endgame, especially a lot of the Disney Plus series that they've watered their stuff down. I'm not one of those because I lap it all up. I argue that and I've argued previously on the show too, is that there's all this stuff that's out there that's there for you to watch when you want to watch it, and it doesn't all have to be watched to understand things.
I would agree with that. I think you're absolutely spot on there. But I do think not so much watering down their products. I mean, I get the idea of the oversaturation. I think I keep seeing people like you and I, like we're some weird elitist cult, Robert. But we are we're the people who are going to turn out on day one, aren't we? We're going to be there. We're going to watch no matter what. They've got us in the bag. I do think they've maybe damaged their brand a little bit by just in terms of the sort of like the public consciousness that there's always a Marvel thing going on, and that they all. And like they haven't been as successful as they used to be. And by successful, I mean that it's a difficult metric, isn't it? Especially with the TV shows. I mean, I think all the TV shows, with one or two exceptions, have largely been pretty good. I do think that the pacing is a real problem in their television shows, but hopefully they'll be addressing that given the concessions that they made in the writers' strike. So it does sound like that's something that's going to be addressed.
And it sounds like they've realized that making the TV shows like they make the movies was a bad mistake. And and they've kind of gone back on that, and they're like, oh, we actually need to make these like TV series. And so they're actually correcting that. They're correcting that mistake now too, and that's fine, And I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all.
But I think that they need to get. It wasn't just COVID, but it was also the writers and actors strike. They had so many detriments happen to them within these last few years, and trying to tell a different story. They're trying to, get us to a different place than we were before. Thanos was a big villain. And Kang himself is a big villain, but Kang takes a different, in my mind, should be taking a different route to get to, for sure. And it's going to, and they've lost their big guns. They lost Iron Man, they lost Captain America. We're going to get to that. But it's I think that going forward from after Endgame was always going to be tough because they lost some of the big guns, and they were going to have to redo and change how they did everything going forward, and it was going to be bumpy no matter what. And so I think that they're doing the best they can to an extent. I think they could be doing a little bit better here and there, but I still think people need to stop crying the death knell of Marvel and just go, hey, let's wait it out, let's see what happens, because I really do believe big things are still coming. And I mean, we still got the X-Men and Fantastic Four coming. So don't count them out yet. Kevin Feige's done a good job so far in my mind.
I've increasingly come around to the idea, exposed by a friend of our podcast, Darren Mooney. He's been on Vampire Videos a few times, and I've come around to his way of thinking that it's not Marvel fatigue, it's generic blockbuster fatigue, and that's borne out by, you just look at the box office numbers of a lot of big films this year that just haven't done it, just have not made their money back, and again, it really shouldn't be costing $200 million to make the Marvels. That's madness to me. So like the Marvels is always up against it because it was going to have to make like maybe 400 or 500 million to make its money back and be profitable. And it's like they need to reassess that and redress the balance, because there's plenty of really great films out there to be made for like 50-60 million dollars that will make your money back and then some. I do think that's not a Marvel thing. That's more just a sort of Hollywood thing at the moment, isn't it?
That's a Hollywood thing. That's not just Marvel at all. That Marvel, it makes it seem like Marvel's like has a big problem with it, and they do, but they also are part of everybody else who's having the same issue right now. Yeah, sure, we had some big hits this year. Barbie and Oppenheimer did well, but those were both going to be, because of the buzz and everything else that was going on with that, those were both going to hit big. But yeah, it's just this, what's happening with Marvel now is it's growth. It's growing pains. It's having to take what happened after Endgame and try to rebuild and try to restructure the way they were doing things, and doing it not to the best, because they were still in that mode too. And I think they're finally realizing, hey, you know what, we need to take this step back, fix a few things that we're doing wrong, and refocus back in. And I think they'll do that, and I really do believe that they'll get back on track.
Yeah, I agree.
And we'll get back by the time Secret Wars comes around and everything like that. I think we'll be, they'll be back on top again. Secret Wars is definitely, I'm excited for it, because it's not the 80s Secret Wars. It's the Hickman Secret Wars that we're going to be getting. And that, if anybody has not read that, you really should read that whole Hickman's Avengers run that leads up to that, because it's already been mentioned a couple of times. These incursions that are happening. Oh man, you guys are not prepared for what is about to happen. So
yeah,
and
everything
I think
the word incursion. Yeah, everything the word incursion is mentioned on screen, my head explodes.
Yeah, and I think the X-Men stuff is involved in that, really. Especially given what we learned in spoilers, the Marvels. So
yeah.
So we'll see what happens. But let's get back and focus back into Endgame.
Yeah, I know, because we have
so much to talk about it. We have so much to talk about, because this movie is 3 hours long, like you said. It's overstuffed with so much stuff, and the fact that they managed to make it work, make it make sense, and everything is just, it's insane. And it goes back to something I've talked about in previous episodes, that the writers, Stephen McFeely, Christopher Marcus, they've been with the MCU since Captain America: The First Avenger. And they were the ones tapped to kind of go along with the Russos to kind of craft the kind of underlying storyline that led to Endgame. And they managed to do something that they surprisingly pulled off. I can't tell you, just I mean, as much as I was along for the ride, I still am surprised at how well it worked out in the end.
Yeah.
That just how they managed to make it work. And this time, in preparation for this, I rewatched it, of course, but this time I watched it for the first time with the commentary. And
I've not done that. Yeah.
Yeah, not that you glean too much extra information out of it. It's been a few years, and a lot of that extra information has come out in articles and stuff like that. So I already knew some of that and everything, but it was interesting to hear some of their stuff, and we'll get into it later on, because it more has to do with Stephen Rogers' storyline that I really need to get into. Because I'm not very happy with the way that one ended. But to an extent. Yeah, no, it's starting out with this one. We start out, and it feels like the beginning of this one, the really the prologue to Endgame is kind of a holdover of stuff that happens that probably should have been at the end of Infinity War, but it makes sense to put it in the beginning of this, just to kind of put in context where everybody's going to be at the beginning of this movie. And
I think opening with that shot of Hawkeye and his family, is a great way to kind of pull the audience right back into the stakes of what's happened and where we are. It's horrifying. I mean, I think Jeremy Renner's great there. It really, you really feel that the horror that must be of watching your family disappear in front of you, but
and not realizing it.
Yeah, what's happening? Yeah, it's a bold move for a movie that's, ostensibly a family blockbuster action film to open with the death of a man's entire family. It's, bold stakes, Marvel, bold stakes.
Yeah.
And then what I love about it is the sort of the breathless pace of that first 20 minutes. I mean,
Yeah.
and the first 20 minutes can almost be a movie in of itself. You get Tony lost in deep space, saved by Captain Marvel. They all return home, put a plan together, rush off to face Thanos, defeat Thanos. And that's all inside like the first, 17, 18 minutes. It's insane how breathless that is. And I don't know about you, Robert, but I will never forget being in the cinema when the fade to black happens, and then it comes up with 5 years later.
Oh, like, there was an audible gasp in the crowd when you realized that. You're like, wait, what? We're coming in. They've now skipped 5 years ahead. Mm-hmm. Like, what is the world like?
It's so important. And we soon find out, think. Yeah, it's so important. I think that they did that because I remember one of the complaints about Infinity War was that ending. It's they're all going to come back in the next film, and you think, well, of course they are. But like, did you watch Empire Strikes Back and think, well, that's Han Solo dead? It's like, it doesn't lessen the stakes. You may intellectually understand that those characters will be back, but the characters on screen don't know that. They aren't watching that thinking, oh, well, Peter will be back soon. Don't worry about it. So you feel the resonance of that. And by giving us that 5-year time jump, I think that's the movie's way of telling you, listen, we may undo this, but we're not undoing all of this. We've lived in these 5 years, and we're going to show you what the world is now. And those scenes at the start are some of my favorite scenes when Steve is doing the sort of like the group session, and they're talking about their losses, and then he goes to check in on Nat, who's kind of trying her best to hold what's left of the Avengers together across the globe,
across the galaxy in a
way,
too.
Yeah. But there's a real sort of like palpable sadness to it, which you need to feel. Because you need to see the consequences of what's happened. And again, I think that makes the ending of the last film even more impactful, because here's what's happened. Here's the fallout of that. And again, like as I said, the fact that they give us that 5-year gap is their way of saying although we're going to be using time travel shenanigans, at the end of this, we're not just going to make it that this never happened. We're going to have to deal with the consequences of this. And obviously, I know we'll get to it, but the introduction of Tony's daughter just further solidifies that. So no matter what we do, we can't lose what we have now. This has to remain. All we can try and do is go back and undo what was done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I got to rewind a little bit, and then I want to add some context for some other stuff. But yeah, no, going back to the Hawkeye bit, that was actually supposed to be at the end of Infinity War. They were going to put that in there, but they realized that wasn't quite as impactful as it would be in the next, as putting it in the beginning of the next movie. You needed to see, especially because Hawkeye hadn't been in the movie at all, up until that point, if they had put it at the end. And so it needed to be, tied to his storyline that would be going through this next movie. And so it was definitely a better choice in that way, a better storytelling choice to put it in there. And it's a great cold opening that, puts the audience on its back feet in those first few minutes. You're just like, oh my God, how, what, this man who just wanted to be with his family and loses everybody at one point, and then doesn't understand what happened, at least, until a little while later, until he could get to talk to somebody and go, hey, what the hell happened? And then, like you said, those first 20 minutes or so where everybody just, gets back together and they go on and take Thanos. And I wanted to mention, I think that one of the greatest parts that I like about this is that early scene with Tony and Nebula. In the ship. Nebula has grown as this character, and even that small scene informs a lot of her character going forward in this movie and in the MCU as a whole, because you see the softening of her character and
Mm.
her embracing these other people and going against Thanos, where she had
Yeah.
been devoted to him previously, you know, devoted to him because she was scared of what he had done to her in the past. Um, and
I
so,
think
you know,
I'm on. Sorry. I was
yeah,
because
no,
I'm
go
on
ahead.
record of saying that I didn't like Nebula's performance in the first Guardians film. I just couldn't get into it. And I'm a big Karen Gillan fan. You know, as a
Yeah,
Doctor Who nerd, you know, I could not be. She's terrific. But like she's gone on to such an amazing character arc throughout the next Guardians movie and then the two Avengers films that she's in.
right.
And like I think you're right. I think she's one of the MVPs of this film. You know, like she's one of the other one we'll get to. I'm curious to see if you agree with me, like the underrated MVP. But here, Nebula is terrific, and like watching her bonding with Rocket in the aftermath of the snap is really well handled as well. And that carries over nicely to Guardians 3 down the road
Yeah,
because I remember thinking that was one of the most affecting things in that film was her reaction to Rocket's situation because she's devastated. And again, that's because of the weight of history that the MCU is allowed to give these characters. It's like they were all that was left of the Guardians for 5 years. So of course
yeah,
they only had each other. And I love that they promote her in this film and they give her a bit more to do. And I mean she's instrumental in the
she
undoing of
is.
Thanos by the end.
Yeah, no, and I would and I mentioned this in my original Guardians of the Galaxy episode that I think that Nebula should have been the main villain for that,
Mm,
because you would have seen a much better character arc from her in the beginning. We get snippets of it in that first movie, but having Ronan being the main villain kind of took away from her story a bit.
yeah.
And I think that that if she had been the villain of that one, that you would have had this much better overall story with her redemption.
Mm,
And so so I've argued that before that would have been more interesting than what we got with Ronan. I
yeah.
like Ronan. I like Lee Pace as an actor. But I think even that character was underserved compared to that. I just don't think they I, I I like what James Gunn has done with the Guardians movies. I think overall they've been very good. I think they've gotten better with each movie, even in terms of their scope and scale.
Mm,
But I I still think that first one, just the villain wasn't as compelling as it could have been if it had been Nebula.
yeah, I think
Um,
that's fair.
but it's it's we but yeah, I think that her character arc in this film specifically also she's a major, like, when you look at this movie, everybody thinks of the big three: Cap, Thor, and Iron Man, and their journeys and everything. But Nebula's, I think, is core to it as well because she is Thanos's undoing in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so and it's her, she provides a lot of the exposition for getting Thanos to the end game. So it's just, it's there's a lot going on with her character that I think that it gets set up here, like you said, that 5 years where she spends with Rocket, when it's just her and Rocket, that yeah, that plays a large part into um Guardians Volume 3. So it's definitely a lot of seeds planted here continue to grow fruit in later installments,
Yeah.
regardless of what people think of the later phase, is that there's still stuff being you know played out.
Mm,
So I think it's important. But yeah, no, I love that those first 20 minutes, the them going off to finding um Thanos and taking him out, and that 5 years later, like I said, an audible gasp in the audience, just knowing that weight of that, like you said, that weight of the time that they've had to live with the consequences of this. And they've had no way of really, they're trying to pick up the pieces of this, but the end of Infinity War left such a big hole in the MCU that you had to show that the emotional weight, the damage it did to everybody. And that, like you said, with Natasha trying to hold on to the Avengers as best as possible and trying to still deal with, things that the Avengers have to deal with previous to that, that there would still be things going on. And she's just trying her best, but you can see Scarlett Johansson's a great actress, and you can just see it all in her face and her eyes, just the how much it's weighing down on her.
Yeah.
And I think it's fantastic that her performance in this, especially in the beginning, is really good.
Yeah, no,
but
100%.
yeah.
She's so good in this film. I do think it's a shame that the way that she gets kind of used towards the midway point. But again, that's something we can get to when we get to it.
Yeah. And I do want to, as I do on my show, is I do want to, put this in comparison to the comic book story that inspired it. And in this movie, this is very much tied to the original Infinity Gauntlet storyline. That, this is obviously different in a lot of ways. The Infinity Gauntlet was played out in space a lot more. Our heroes were out in space dealing with not only Thanos but also Mephisto, which we still haven't gotten Mephisto in the MCU, even though people have been waiting for him to show up in various forms since. But yeah, he's that the events of the Infinity Gauntlet storyline happen a lot faster. Thanos snaps, 50% of the world, or the universe gets snapped out of existence, and arguably, if I'm remembering correctly, it's not very long, like, before things are rectified. The gauntlet gets wrested away from him, and everything gets snapped back into existence within a short span of time. There's no 5 years. It would have been fascinating to see the comic books do something like that, but they didn't do that, and that was fine. The story was different. So it's interesting to see the movie take that aspect and run with it in a different way, and then we have since seen even more of the after effects after Endgame in phase 4. It gets referenced a lot more, the blip and how that affected some of the characters moving forward. And so it's interesting to that the MCU continues to reference that and to show just how damaging that was, and to the characters and to the world and to everything else, that it's just fascinating. I love the storytelling that they do in this universe, and that's why I'm all in on it no matter what. Like, even if they falter here and there, it's interesting to see where they're going with this storyline and how they use these, how they pick up the pieces moving forward from there. So
I always think that they're at their best when they take storylines from the comics and then do their own thing with it. They might, as you said, they use it as like a jumping off point. And they've done that with everything. That Civil War is the best example of that. The Civil War storyline in the comics, I think, is it has its high points and it has a lot of low points. I don't think it really works for me overall. In fact, I reread that just over last summer, just to go back through it, and just some of it lands, some of it doesn't. But the film version of it is terrific fun. Just a rollicking good adventure that puts Tony and Cap at odds with each other, which obviously pays off in this movie. But yeah, and you're absolutely right. Infinity War is exactly the same. The Infinity Gauntlet, they take aspects of like 2 or 3 different renditions of the story, and they just basically put them together into their own sort of smorgasbord of what they want, and then they give us this sort of weird MCU jambalaya that's nothing like what you're expecting. And I fully expect the same if they're adapting the Hickman run for Secret Invasion.
Yes.
There will be elements of that's very much front and center, but I mean, I fully expect them to go and do their own thing, which is what I want. You know, give me a fresh story.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that one, it would be real tough to adapt Hickman's storyline into the movies, just because
you need like 10 movies.
Yeah, and you would need not only 10 movies, but you would need years worth of run up to it. Because it's literally what happened. It was like a good 4 years of multiple Avengers storylines happening all at once that led up to the Secret Wars storyline. And then even when that happened, the Secret Wars itself was like an almost year-long event that crossed over amongst a host of other storylines. And so it was just like it would be way too broad. I just don't think that they're going to adapt that, as cool as that would be. I just don't think that they have the time and or money to get up to that point in any way that would make sense to the general audience. Us as comic book fans, we kind of know things, and we kind of forgive a lot of things that go into a lot of this stuff. So it makes it a lot different than when they try to pull it into the movies. And that's where, like, I agree with you. I think that they're best when they take a jumping off point, that they go, okay, well, let's take Civil War or the Infinity Gauntlet storyline. Let's take that and let's make it our own thing. And let's kind of just see where these stories take us to get to that point, and take the initial idea, Cap versus Iron Man, and find out how to make that the fallout, and find out where that storyline goes. Let's put a couple characters in here, and see how we can make that work. And I argue that they've done well with it, and I've not been disappointed that they've not fully adapted some storyline. Like, I love that this is an alternate universe version of the Marvel characters and storylines and stuff like that. It's perfectly fine with me. It's like what they did with the Ultimate line in the comic book. They took familiar characters, familiar stories, and did their own thing. And I'm fully on board with them doing that in the MCU. And I argue that they're still continuing to do a great job with it.
You're not going to get too much argument from me on that.
But yeah, no, I think that when we get past that 5 years later, we get the reemergence of Ant-Man, who becomes kind of the whole impetus for the rest of this movie. He realizes that when he comes out of the quantum realm, that he can that for him no time had passed. But for the outside world, 5 years has passed. He finds his daughter, and finds her 5 years older. She's now a teenager. And that that was heartbreaking too, to see, because he was such a devoted father to his daughter, and they had such a good relationship, and to see how he had missed 5 years of her life, it was just heartbreaking.
It's horrifying,
and it's such subtle, small storytelling that pays off big like that. And I love that in these movies too. Is you take these small moments and they have such weight to them.
No, I think Scott Lang is the other sort of secret weapon in this movie. He's like the beating heart of the film. His return from the quantum realm, with a little help from the quantum rat, is kind of the spark that ignites the plot of this film. And I'm always kind of quietly devastated by the look on his face as he searches desperately for Cassie's name on that sort of the wall of the lost. but I mean, on top of that, it's a great performance. But he's like the general audience is way into the film. He's your
Yeah.
everyman. He's your sort of like, not to call him an idiot, but yeah, Nebula does that, so I'll go with it. He's the the idiot. Like, explain it to me like I'm six. Make sure I understand this. And so when you get all the sort of wibbly wobbly, timey wimey antics of the second act, he's the guy who they have to explain it to, so that he keeps it in check. And again, he's a great audience proxy in that sense, because like, right, if Ant-Man can understand it, we can understand it. So that tends to be the way to go for it.
Yeah, no, he starts the whole time heist and everything, and it's so on point for him. Like, it's of course the former criminal, the guy who is all about heisting and everything, like the burglary. He's the guy who comes up with the time heist, and I don't know how many people know this about me, but I love a good heist flick. So especially a good like kind of a good comedic heist flick more than anything else. Like, I like a good one that adds in a lot of comedy. The Ocean's movies are good. I like them okay-ish, but they kind of fit that mold for me. I wouldn't say they're favorites for me, but I like them enough that I recognize that they're good. But yeah, this is what's great like that. And him calling it literally a time heist is just, it's so perfect. It's so on brand, and it's so good. And I love that the writers, they know the voices. And I'm pretty sure that they talk to they definitely talk to people like James Gunn and other people to get the voices correct for all these characters. And so it's great that the writers on this movie managed to get everybody's voice just correct. And I think that it goes into, a lot of these actors have inhabited these characters for a long time, so they probably had a lot of input as well. So this is the ultimate movie of collaboration, not only amongst like just the actors and the directors, but amongst all the directors of the MCU, all the writers and everybody else, the various composers, and just like everything being held together. It still amazes me that this worked as well as it did. But yeah, it's just, Scott Lang, like you said, he's the other beating heart of the movie. He's the way in for all of us to understand everything.
I had a friend who went to see this film who hadn't really seen anything else. Like, he only went, he's not a big fan of comic book movies. He only went because it was this huge sort of like cultural moment, that everybody was going to see this film. So he went to see it. I think he'd seen Infinity War, so he's seen that to kind of set this one up. And he said to me, it's like the Scott Lang character helped him understand. He just kind of like that was who he could grab onto. And it's like, right, if I can kind of follow what this guy's saying and what this guy's doing, I can understand the rest of it well enough. Even when all the sort of the big, massive, silly superheroics begin, like, he can understand the premise and plot thanks to Scott Lang, taking you through it. And obviously, Tony's disdain that Scott has learned all of his time travel rules from watching Back to the Future is a wonderful touch.
And they mention other
hot tub time machine.
Yeah. It's so bizarre. It's so funny. But I love that they reference the other time travel movies, and they try to set down their own framework for what they're going to do. And I love it because it fits totally with the the Marvel comic books universe, in terms of alternate realities. And we get more of this later on. We're getting the after effects of Endgame in the new multiverse saga. And again, the seeds of what are happening now in the Marvel universe, some of that was laid out in Endgame. And so I think that that's interesting, how these things are kind of working out now.
Yeah, I mean, I keep waiting for that to be made more of a point, to be honest, Robert, that like the Avengers used time travel to effectively break the multiverse and save everybody, right? There have to be consequences to that. There have to be ramifications. And also, there has to be a reason that is taken off the board, because if it's just a case of like, well, if we lose, don't worry, we'll just nip back through time and sort it out. That removes all the stakes. And I do think that may be something that ultimately the Kang Dynasty deals with. This is why we can't
Right.
use time travel, because these sorts of things can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that you're spot on with that. And they kind of reference that. They kind of talk about that in Loki season 1 about how the Avengers were able to do this without necessarily breaking the time stream.
Yeah, don't
But
they just hand wave it away though? It's like, yeah, they were meant to do
they
that
do.
though. Like,
They're just
oh,
like,
okay,
yeah,
fair
no,
enough.
what they did was fine. They were meant to do that. Yeah. But it's like, were they really? So, but it's definitely, everybody should watch Loki season 1 and 2 because they're fantastic. And they there's a lot going on there that I think is integral to the current multiverse saga. So
yeah.
I think we're going to get more of that embedded into stuff in the future. But yeah, no, it's what happens in a lot of there's so much to talk about. It's so hard to not talk about everything, but I don't want to go like, doing a beat by beat retelling of the movie and everything, because it just would take even longer than we have. But no, it's definitely, I want to hit on the characters.
Yeah,
so
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. So kind of getting back just a little bit, we do get a follow-up on Hawkeye. He's now going by the name Ronin, and he's without his family there to ground him in his grief. We see everybody dealing with their grief in different ways. Natasha, she's like, taken on the burden of running the Avengers and keeping the world and the galaxy safe as best as possible. Meanwhile, Hawkeye, Clint has now gone off and not dealt with his grief in a healthy way, because now he's just taking out all the criminals in the world. He's gone on a killing spree to just,
I thought you were talking about his haircut. Oh, so thank goodness you're talking. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
I'm with you now, Rob.
Yeah. That's a questionable haircut. But but it's definitely, and this again takes off on a storyline that happened in the comic books. Hawkeye died at one point in the comic books, and then he came back via other ways through the Marvel comics. They no hero stays dead in the comic books. But when he came back, he was not Hawkeye, he was Ronin. And it's a character who, very similar, used a sword, was a lot more a killer than Hawkeye had been, especially for a person who uses bows, a bow and arrow.
Yeah.
And in the MCU, we've gotten him using a few trick arrows. But the MCU, he's a lot closer to being a killer than he is in the comic books. In the comic books, he basically just uses trick arrows, which I love.
Well, in the MCU, he is one of the heroes who has no compunction about killing, and I don't mind that, actually. Like, I don't want my Spider-Man to be killing people, right? Because that's not the character. But I've got no issue whatsoever with Iron Man, Natasha, Clint, Captain America killing the bad guys, because they're so, well, not Tony so much, but the rest of the soldiers. And in Natasha's case, she's one of the most highly trained assassins in the world. I do want her killing people. That's what she's there to do.
Right. No, and I agree. I think that Captain America, he's a soldier. He's like, I don't have the, like, in the comic books, he transitioned into this character who doesn't kill, and I understood that. He wanted to get away from that aspect of himself. He was no longer a soldier in that way. He did what he had to do during wartime. It's different now, so he doesn't want to kill people if he doesn't have to. He will if need be. But in the MCU, it's a lot grayer. And I'm okay with that. But yeah, no, I agree that, Clint, using more regular arrows than not, it's fine. I just wish his character was closer to what he is in the comic books. And I've talked about this before. It's just, I just don't think his character is close enough to the comic books. And I think that's a detriment, really. That seeing him as Ronin in this, isn't that far removed from the character we've already seen. Yes, he doesn't have his family to ground him and maybe make him softer, but that doesn't take away the fact that he was already a killer to begin with. He was a soldier, he was a spy. You know, there's things that he's done in his past that he's had to do. This is taking it a step forward. He's not killing innocent people, he's killing criminals. And you know, and arguably, you know, people don't deserve to die just because they commit crime. You know, it's, but you know, the argument can be seen there depending on it's like a Punisher-esque character. You know, the Punisher only kills violent criminals and everything. And I think that's what Ronan is doing in this. But again, like we said, it's not far removed from the character that we've seen on screen before. Whereas if it had been more of the Clint we see in the comic books, it might be a little bit of a change. So when I see him and he's all like that, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. I don't think he's fallen that far from who he is. So, you know, it you know, having Natasha drag him back and, you know, from the brink of all this and everything like that, for me, doesn't have as much emotional weight, just because the character hasn't been that his storyline is one of the least delved into in the MCU until his own series that it gets post Endgame. And once we get that, I think we get into a closer version to the comic book version, which was good. But yeah, I think that it's interesting to see his character, and I love that him and Natasha have this connection. That's the one thing that you've been able to see throughout their course in these movies when they've been together, is that they have this almost family connection to each other. They are family to each other, that it goes beyond just being partners, co-workers and everything like that. They have shared history together that nobody else has, and so that's what makes the later scene more impactful. So, you know, his introduction as Ronan, it's okay. Like I said, it's interesting, but I don't have that emotional weight to it that maybe others might have to it. Because I don't think it's that far of a fall for him.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I think my connection to Hawkeye had always come through Natasha, because I think she's a much more well drawn out character within the MCU.
Right, exactly.
And it's through her connection to him that I kind of found him as a character. That was up until the TV show Hawkeye, which I think is a real triumph and really does a lot for him that the films just weren't able to do. And then in this film he's fine. He, you know, and I don't mean that as backhandedly as it sounds, you know, oh, he's fine, but that is kind of how I feel about it. It's not a bad performance. He's good with what he does. I think him and Scarlett Johansson have terrific chemistry together. That really sparkle with each other. And when we get to that moment, you know, where, you know, they arrive on Vormir, you know, again, I'm sure much like me, Robert, the minute that the two of them headed off to Vormir, it was like, oh God, no, I know what's going to have to happen here. The only question is, who would it be? But even then, I think given the fact that we'd spent the pre-credit scene with Hawkeye losing his family, like we were always going to be losing Natasha. And I just think it's one of the films, I wouldn't say misstep, but I don't think it's handled particularly great. I think the actual scene is fine. You know, I get that she's doing everything she can to stop him sacrificing himself so that she can sacrifice herself. That all works fine. But I do feel the lack of acknowledgement, or the lack of real sort of like time spent mourning that loss, is a problem for the film. But again, it's 3 hours long. You know, you know, where do we draw the line? Is it 5 hours long, 6 hours? I'm okay with that. Give me 5 or 6 hours. I'm fine with that. But for the average movie going public, I think it might be a bit of a stretch.
No, and the filmmakers do talk about that in the commentary. And so they mention, number one, that her arc had reached the stage where she had gone through and her ledger was no longer red. She had been to the point where she's at in in the beginning of Endgame, where she's taken on this burden, that she has become this different character. She is made up for her past sins. And so her taking on the sacrificial role makes sense. Her character arc in that moment is complete. And they talk about how, yes, she didn't get as much of a that, you know, our audiences and stuff, and they argued about how best to honor her in that way, because, you know, Iron Man gets this big send off at the end, whereas she doesn't. She's almost dismissed. Not really. They have that moment on the dock where they're very emotional and they're talking about it, and they kind of work through their feelings and stuff a little bit through there. But she was to get another movie, or her whole movie afterwards. So she gets her kind of epilogue in a way. We get that one whole movie to kind of be with her again. And that was their argument for why they didn't give her send off as big of a moment as they do for Iron Man. And also at the same time, Tony is a much bigger figure, not only to the world at large, but to the Avengers and everybody else. Tony was this bigger than life person, whereas Natasha only had the Avengers. And those people, I would argue, that were there at the dock were the people who were closest to her and her true family, that working through it at that moment was probably as close as you could get, as best as you could get. That in this movie, because it wouldn't have made sense to give her this big send off like they do with Tony, because the people who were there in that earlier moment were all that were needed. And so, you know, we can argue it, you know, there's, you know, I don't get me wrong, I would have loved to have seen her get a much bigger send off and everything, but I think that what they did was right, especially due to the fact that she was going to get her own movie afterward, and we'd get more time with her. Tony, we don't get any more time with after this point. So
I get where you're coming from. My issue is always just I look at it as you know, I take a step back and look at it, and it just, was it, they say the optics aren't great, you know.
Absolutely, I agree.
That's how I feel about it. And
totally,
I agree with you. If you investigate it with any real sort of conviction, you understand all the reasons. I do get it. You know, I wouldn't
right, yeah.
But I just think, like, if you're just looking at that objectively and stepping back for a moment and taking yourself out of the Marvel headedness of it all, it's like, it's not the best look, guys. And again, like, Natasha is now one of what 3 or 4 characters in the MCU who've properly died and not returned, and you know, they're almost all women, which again isn't a good look at all. But yeah, from a storytelling point of view, I completely understand it.
Yeah, let's kind of rewind a little bit and kind of go back to some earlier stuff. You know, because I mean, we have 3 main plots going on in this section. You know, we've got the Clinton and Black Widow section that we've talked about, and then we've got this two other things. I want to go back to the kind of the before all of this. You know, when they're setting up the time heist, it's a great way of kind of going back into the old movies and kind of, you know, looking at things from different perspectives, and especially giving giving things a little bit more not context, but more of a highlight. Like Thor: The Dark World is considered by many to be one of the lesser movies in the franchise, and I'm one of those.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you say Thor: The Dark World, all I hear is ooh, dark elves. Ooh.
Yeah, and dark elves used really, really poorly. Malekith should have been a fantastic villain, especially played by Christopher Eccleston, but he seems super hampered in that. I'm not sure. I'm assuming it was the writing, because Eccleston is not that kind of actor. Like, anybody who's seen his run on Doctor Who knows that guy can chew some scenery.
Well, I remember reading in Empire magazine in the run up to this being released. It's very clear in my head. an interview with Eccleston talking about this role, and he was talking about how he didn't really want to do a Marvel movie, like a superhero movie at all. But he said that the way this character was sold to him, and like the betrayal of his people, and sort of trying to reunite things, and like it sounded all very Shakespearean, and there was clearly a lot there. And he has talked about it on record a few times afterwards that he was so disappointed with the final film because like none of his performance is in there. Like it's all gone. Like all the stuff that he kind of poured his heart and soul into because he's that kind of actor just didn't make it to the final cut. When they were reframing things.
That's so interesting and weird too, because it's like, why wouldn't have you why did you go with like the most sleepy version of his character, like the most underwhelming version? It's like, and that's why they've had this like weird villain problem, is just that they always choose the weird, like a weird villain. Number one, like Malekith, number one, shouldn't even really been used in my mind. There's other Thor villains that would have been better, but whatever. Malekith.
Can I ask? Sorry, can I ask, Robert? Have you read the Jason Aaron run on Thor?
That's a much better version of Malekith. That version would have been much better.
I read that after the film, and it just angered me. So, oh my god, this is a great character. Where was this guy? I'd love to see him in the film.
No, exactly. That portrayal of that character would have been so much more interesting and fun. I mean, for anybody who hasn't read this, Malekith literally cuts Thor's arm off and carries it around with him for a while. It's ridiculous.
He's the devil incarnate. He's evil beyond the telling. So evil that they don't even really want him in hell anymore, because he's too evil. And it's like, when it is very big and over the top, as you can do in the comics, but there was no reason not to have that element, I don't think, in the film. And it just feels like they went, as you said, for the softest version, and it just doesn't really work, which is a shame because I love Eccleston, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and now knowing that there's like footage that like they didn't put in where he's maybe potentially having a much like more interesting version of the character, is just like, why? That makes no sense to me. But anyway, that's not germane to this discussion anyway, because we're talking about Endgame, but it is in a way. So they go back to Thor: The Dark World, because that's where the ether is that they need to be able to get, which is one of the Infinity Stones. Wait, stones. Stones in this.
Stones.
Sorry, I get confused because they're gems in the comic books. So it always confuses me. I always get like, I'm like, wait, am I saying the right one? So Infinity Stones. And so because it's one of the Infinity Stones, they need to go back to that specific time and place. But it's also more so, I think, that it's a chance to go back and give that conversation between Thor and Frigga, and really give Renee Russo her most her biggest time like playing that character. She spends more time in that playing that character than she did in the previous two Thor movies that she was actually in. So it's ridiculous. She's such a fantastic actress. She just had no play in it at all.
Yeah. Now, Thor's reunion with Frigga is one of my favorite things in the film, to be honest, because I agree with you. I think that she's criminally wasted in the first two Thor movies. You're not really given anything of any depth or substance. It's just such a small scene, but it does so much heavy lifting. And like, you look at Thor as well, and how, he's kind of brought down to his lowest ebb in this movie. And like, it always kind of chokes me up, that scene, because it's all the best things about Chris Hemsworth as an actor, I think, where he is really funny and self-deprecating, but he's also kind of oddly sincere and earnest in a lot of the things that he does as Thor. And like, I think he's the actor in Infinity War and Endgame, actually, who gets the least credit, even though he's doing some of the heaviest lifting with his performance. I think he's revelatory, and I'm sure we'll talk about Thor in a bit more depth. But like, I couldn't agree more. That scene is just it's so sad and beautiful and funny. It shouldn't really work because it's all of these tones all at once, but they land it really well.
Yeah, and I guess I was wrong. There's actually 4 storylines going on at this time, because I'd I mentioned the Thor thing, but that was going on at the same time as the Nebula and War Machine, the Black Widow and Clint, and then the New York. Well, actually 5. Damn it. I don't know what's going on, because you got Hulk on his own separate thing as well. But yeah, no. So I think that, no, I agree with you. Thor in this movie, Chris Hemsworth, there are moments like, and it's in, like I said earlier, I watched the commentary version of the movie this time, and they mention it too, because they talk about how Hemsworth goes from being the silly, goofy, drunk guy yelling at somebody on Fortnite, then to nearly breaking down in the same scene. When Thanos' name is mentioned. That the change in tone, and like you said, he does not get enough credit for being the actor that he is, and being kind of the emotional heart through the movie. Like, it's just there's so many people who are carrying this movie, and they're doing such a good job at it.
Well, just now that we're talking about Thor, what do you think of the fat Thor meme? Let's be honest, that's what it is. I remember there being some anger online at the sort of let's all laugh at fat Thor stuff.
Yeah,
but for me, I think that kind of misses the point a little bit, because that's how the other characters are reacting to him to make themselves feel less uncomfortable. Thor is a literal god, and he's lost everything, including his own faith in himself. He's got nothing left. And, it's not so much just laughing at fat Thor, although there are a couple of really good jokes. And listen, as a husky gentleman myself, like, I feel like I'm quite entitled to laugh at the odd fat joke here or there.
Yeah.
But if we were really meant to laugh at the fact that he was fat, then he would have returned to being buff Thor in the film's final battle. That's what they would have done. The lightning call would have fixed him. But it's like, no. We're going to reckon with the fact that he's kind of, he stopped looking after himself because he doesn't feel that he's got a reason to go on anymore, or that he's got a place in this world. I love that. I think it's so sad to see what he's become. But when we meet him in New Asgard.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I know there's definitely been some concern over the like kind of the fat shaming aspect of the character, but upon this rewatch, I agree with you. I think it's more not really focusing on the fat shaming, because nobody really fat shames him. It's really the audience, honestly. Like, it wasn't, nobody in there really remarks about him being fat. It's more about him being slovenly. And when Tony walks by him, and he's just kind of strolling there, and he goes, on your left, Lebowski. And it's just, it's great, because I mean, he does look like Lebowski at that point.
He does.
So it's like, it's so perfect. But
I love
it's more about talking about his, like, because nobody really wants to address it with him. Because he doesn't want to address it himself. He has been broken. He feels he is unworthy because of this incident. That's when, because that's when he gets the hammer later. He calls the hammer to him in once he's in the past, back in Asgard, he calls the hammer to him. And when it comes back to him and he can hold it again, the elation that you see in his face is palpable. He knows, I'm still worthy. I may have fallen, but I'm still worthy. I can still do this. I can, that, and talking to his mother changes everything for him. He still has the self-doubt, but everything has changed for him towards a positive. He now can see a path forward. That's important, I think, to the character as well. Because I mean, you see it a couple of more times later on down the road. He is still looking for that redemption. He needs that redemption, some form of redemption that he, like, for himself, something that he feels will be that redemption. Past the, getting the hammer and having his friends believe in him and everything, and having his mother believe in him and all that. Like, all those are little nice steps towards that redemption that he feels he needs.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's a lovely story over these two films, and I really like the payoff for it. And again, we will get to the big climactic scene, but it would have been I would have felt it a bit of a betrayal of his sort of narrative arc at that point, or his emotional arc even, had they suddenly just reverted to being buff Thor. Because like, again, it was to show you don't have to be, the super ripped, guy to be the hero. He looks terrific when he becomes the sort of like, unslovenly Thor by the end, which I really enjoy. I think it's a wonderful moment in the film, and you do feel like when the lightning strike happens and he changes, I think everyone was expecting that, weren't they? I think we all expected him to go back to how he used to look, and it's like, no, I'm glad that they've maintained that, because it makes sense for the character.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and I think that's, he needs to get to that point. It's like, we see it in Thor: Love and Thunder, that then he, later on down the road, he's like still on that path of redemption for himself, and that's when he starts to get back into shape, so he has to work at it. It's not something that's going to be a quick fix, and I like that a lot. I like that when he does have, he's there with both hammers, and he changes into his I guess uniform or whatever we want to call it, but he changes, the lightning strike happens, and he's still Fat Thor. He's still, he's still worthy in that form, and he knows he's worthy in that form, and that's what's important. I think that's definitely a great character arc from the beginning of the movie, because the beginning of the movie, he takes Thanos's head off. But it's too late. He should have done it earlier, like Thanos said. And that will forever haunt him. Is that moment where he could have done something, didn't, and it caused such massive destruction to everything else that happened afterward. It's just something he's going to have to live with. And more power to him, because definitely I don't think I could have done better than that. So
I do love his arc across these movies. I know we're not talking about Infinity War, but that final arc, that final act when he arrives on Earth, pretty much as Superman. That's the closest MCU will ever get to having like a Superman moment, when he arrives in the battle, wipes the floor with everything. As soon as he arrives, the tide turns for the heroes, and they still have him fall just that little bit short, which is so in keeping with the Thor that we know. It's lovely. It's a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that they've done the Thor up until Ragnarok is kind of just uneven and not very interesting to me, and I think to a lot of people, and I think that once we get Ragnarok and we get kind of him embracing some of the comedy aspects of it, some of the absurdity, that I think that leaning into that, while also not getting rid of his godly aspects, and still in the whole pathos and everything else, that I think that works out so well. It gives him more of a well-rounded character than what we had before Ragnarok.
Yeah. And I will make no comments on Thor: Love and Thunder, because we could be here until 5 a.m. talking about that one, Robert. So let's I'll run scurrying away from that.
Definitely. All right, but that being said, so I mean that's another one of the things going on. Him and Rocket are going and getting the ether. It's a fairly quick sequence. Theirs isn't too troubled. It's mostly about Thor getting the other hammer and getting that kind of reassurance from his mother, especially for some, being that she had already died. He needed that. He needed, we all sometimes need that reassurance from a parent that things are good, so that we're not as horrible of a person as we think we are. But and then meanwhile we've got who is it, Tony, Cap, Hulk, and Ant-Man, all back in 2012 New York. Hulk's got to go off and get the time stone, and the other three are trying to grab the
Tesseract, yeah, the Space Stone,
the Tesseract, and the
the Mind
scepter.
Stone, yeah, the Mind Stone as well. That's right.
Yeah. So they've got 3 in there at the same time. So it's, them all trying to grab them all at once.
Just very quickly, something that we didn't talk about, just really quickly, I want to bring up one of my favorite things in this film is just before they go on the time heist and we get those scenes of the Avengers hanging out and talking and, having takeaway food and bantering with each other about how they're going to do this. And I've said on many podcasts, and I maintain this, I could watch a 2-hour movie of these guys hanging out and talking. That would be in my element. I love it. I love all the little micro interactions with each other. Again, the callbacks to their shared history. I love all that stuff. And you can tell with this cast, there's a real sort of camaraderie between them. And you see all the interviews and stuff, and they all, they're in the infamous WhatsApp group together. And they all seem to be of a single mind. They all seem to be very close to each other. And you feel that on screen, I think. And just watching them shooting the shit, just as they get prepared for it it's absolutely glorious. And that eureka moment that they have where it's like, oh god, there's 3 Infinity Stones all in New York, like in 2012. It's I love it so much.
Yeah, and that was what was great too, because that was Natasha who thought of it. She put the pieces together on that one. So it's good that it wasn't one of the geniuses who thought of it. It was somebody who was and not that Natasha's not smart, but it was great that it wasn't like Bruce or Tony. And so but yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that a hangout movie would be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, would watch.
Yeah, totally would watch. I like a good hangout movie. So, a hangout movie with superheroes, just, talking about stuff, maybe just, a series of hangouts talking about past adventures would be really cool. So I'd be down for that. But yeah, no, I think it's really cool that she puts that together, and that's what finally clicks for them. They're like, okay, well now we got to send these 2 people off, or this group here, this group here, this group here. Yeah. And it's 3 separate groups, and like 3 different times, and so because the what's it called? The Clint and Natasha thing is at the same time as the War Machine and Nebula stuff that's going on.
That's right. Yeah,
it's 2014. So wait, 2014? I can't remember. Whenever Guardians came out.
Whenever Guardians was it? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I guess that would be a little bit. Yeah, maybe 2014. Yeah, it should be 2014. All right. Anyway, but regardless, but they yeah, so I mean, to me, I think the biggest, the most fun section of the time heist is the New York stuff. The Tony, Ant-Man, and Cap. Just everything that goes wrong can go wrong. They manage to get the scepter, but they lose the Tesseract because it gets knocked out of their hands, and right into Loki's. So Loki from 2012. So this gives Loki new lease on life, because our version of Loki's been dead since Infinity War. So it's kind of nice to kind of get these characters back again. We got Loki back doing stuff, and then we got Gamora back doing stuff, because they managed to go back in time and pluck her out of it. She comes back in with Thanos later on in the end. So it's so we got these characters back who are subtly different. Things are different. And Loki doesn't come back into the main universe. He's just in his 2 seasons of of his Disney Plus show, which is excellent, by the way. Anybody who hasn't seen that, please go watch
100%. Please seek it out. It is so good.
That this second season was phenomenal. I don't see how they could have pulled it off, but they pulled it off, and like I'm I'm the only disappointment I have is that I want to know more. And I know we're not going to get any more after this. So
no, I was perfectly satisfied with the ambiguity that hangs over those final moments. But just the idea of Loki sitting at the center of creation, I think it's a gorgeous idea, and it's so wonderfully captured and brought to life, as he walks into the abyss of time. Honestly, sorry, I could be gushing about this for a long time, Robert, so I'll stop just there.
Absolutely. But yeah, no, the whole sequence with in New York is great. You got Cap, who with the knowledge of history now manages to pull off a little double cross with what's his name, with Rumlow
Sitwell.
and
Sitwell and
Sitwell.
Rumlow,
yeah. He just leans over and Hail Hydra, and then it's just like walks off with the scepter, and it's just like, dude, like it's so perfect. It was so perfect. It's just like, because they even said in the commentary too, they were like, we set this up and we're like, we want everybody to think, oh, here it comes, we're gonna have another elevator scene. And then they subvert it and just go, oh, okay, well, no elevator scene, which was so much better. As soon as he leaned over and said Hail Hydra, I was like, oh my God. And this gets to the crux of why it bothers me so bad, the end, and we'll get to that. But but yeah, it's both, because this is what they say in the commentary. They're talking about how Cap and Iron Man, they get their endings because and this is what we talked about with Natasha as well. Natasha had basically kind of completed her arc of life in a way, and that's kind of what happens with Tony and Cap as well. By the end of this, Tony has pulls off the most selfless act that he can to save the universe, and everybody else he sacrifices himself. I mean, no spoilers here, everybody should know this by now. And then the end,
God, yes, please don't listen to this before you've seen the film. My God, right? What are you thinking, people?
Yeah, I mean, come on, it's been out for a while, go watch it. But yeah, no, if I just think that, and then Caps is about where he has done everything in his life. He's been nothing but selfless, to his own detriment, to his own personal life. That's all he ever has is the mission. And you have that, you see that in Winter Soldier. He mentions that about he just wants to get back out there and serve. He wants to, that's his goal, is just to continue the mission, because that's who he is as a person and as a character, that he would never stop. And so, and I'm just going to get into it now, because talking about these characters and stuff, I have to talk about. So when the reasoning the writers and the directors put him in that and let him go back and have his little happy ending there, was because he was getting some of that life that Tony told him to get.
Yeah.
And which was fine. I get it. He deserves that. Don't get me wrong. But anybody who knows the character of Captain America would know that there is no way in hell Captain America would ever just lay down and let events unfold the way they did. Given the knowledge he has, you're telling me that he would let Hydra continue to infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D. this whole time and wouldn't try to stop that at some point?
Can I give you my rebuttal to that, Robert? Because I mean, this is something I've sat with for a long while. You mean Cap's my favorite character, so I've given this a lot of thought.
Yeah, no, and he's one of my favorites too. And I've been reading him since the 80s, since the original run that where John Walker became Captain America. That's when I came into the comic books. And so when Captain America put down his shield and gave it up because the government wanted to control him, this has been a recurring theme in his life. He didn't stop being a character who helped people and did the right thing. He just put aside being Captain America, and that's what bothered me about it. But go ahead with your rebuttal.
Well, so taking it on the merits of the character that we know in the MCU and just keeping it at that alone, because I appreciate there's a weight of history in those comics that he's a very different character in those comics to the one that we have here, to this Steve Rogers. Now, I don't, people wouldn't like this, okay, but I don't think the time travel in this film really makes that much sense if you hold it up to any kind of scrutiny.
No, absolutely.
The scene with Hulk and the Ancient One, where she explains that removing these stones is creating like another branch in the multiverse, and will create a new timeline. That is then directly contradicted later in the film by the way they want you to understand time travel. So I think it's a film at odds with itself. And having read the writers and the Russos talk about it, they both come at it from very different angles as well. So that's okay. Given that, I think you're allowed a bit of your own sort of like personal headcanon to keep things correct. I think that's the best way of doing it. So for me, it's a case of once Steve has completed the mission, okay, once he's returned the stones to where they were meant to go, and including, might I say, one of the most phenomenal ideas that they should be doing, which is a short horror of Steve Rogers chasing Jane Foster around Asgard, trying to stab her with the ether. I mean, I need to see that. That sounds phenomenal. So he completes the mission, everything's back where it was, and he goes back and he spends the rest of his life with Peggy. Now, the romantic in me adores it, because I've been longing for it. I've been saying for a long time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've been saying for a long time.
I agree. Totally.
Yeah. In the run up to that's the ending I wanted for Cap. I wanted him and Peggy to reunite. And when he almost runs into Peggy in the 70s, that was the point at which in the film I thought, we are going to get it. They're going to end up back together. So I was delighted with that. Okay. Now, I agree with what you're saying. It is a bit sort of like, would Cap really down tools and allow the future to play out the way it's going to? But given what we know, he's got no choice. He has to, because if he changes anything, we enter that realm again where what if the things he changes are what leads Thanos to victory? If he were to stop things at an earlier point, then maybe Tony doesn't pick up, doesn't end up in that cave in Afghanistan and doesn't go on to become Iron Man and doesn't inspire the world around him to become greater than they are. So I think Steve has no choice, and he understands that. And I think what you said is right. He's someone who would maybe put the shield down and not be Captain America, but that doesn't mean that he wouldn't be of service to the society in which he's living. So that's kind of how I look at it. I mean, I think he understands that things have to play out. He knows that there's another version of him in the ice sleeping who's going to wake up in 40 years, and that it's his duty to play things out the way they're meant to play out. Because this film does hammer home in that final sequence that things have to have played out exactly as they played out. There's no room for variables. Doctor Strange has seen however many billion scenarios play out, and this is the one scenario where things go according to plan. So I've always just taken it as that. It's like, well, Steve has, like, as you said, he's lived his entire existence. It's been about service. It's been about self-sacrifice. It's been about giving everything to the cause. And his final lesson that he learned from Tony was that he has to have a life of his own as well. He has to go get that. It's important. And I think weighing the scales, I think this version of Steve Rogers has done enough to have earned that happy ending that he treats himself to at the end. But yes, other readings are available, but that's the one that makes me sort of most satisfied narratively as well as emotionally for Steve Rogers, because I really cannot stress enough how much I love that performance of Chris Evans across all those movies. And for me, this really is just the perfect send-off for him. I'm sure we'll get to the portal scene and all that a little bit later, so I'll not go into that in too much depth. But honestly, I can't... There are a few things in cinema that have made me as happy as watching Cap's arc in this movie play out the way it does. I think it's lovely.
No, and I agree with you. I think that, he definitely deserves his happiness, and that given the circumstances that he's under, of course, he's not going to mess with time. He's not going to mess with things that would potentially ruin their chance to win the day at the end. Absolutely. I agree with you that that's the way that it played out. It just feels so weird that, like, to me, the character would not have even stayed back in time, is what I'm saying. That was my frustration with it, is yes, he deserves a happy ending, but he doesn't have to have it. And don't get me wrong, I love Peggy Carter. I think she is a massively underused character in the MCU. I loved the TV show, and wish it would have gotten 19 more seasons. But but it, I just feel like Cap would have understood that he could have had a life in the current time period with somebody else and moved forward and still continue to be a service in that way. And that's how it is in the comic books and everything else. And that's
I just think they've done such a good job of showing that this version of Steve Rogers can't fit in. He doesn't fit in this world, and he's tried. I mean,
yeah.
By the point we get to the end of Endgame, he's been in this world now for about maybe over a decade, I would say. And he cuts a lonely figure. He's a man at a time. He just doesn't. I just think they gave him the best version of the ending for this version of the character.
No, for sure. Like I said,
yeah. I think in terms of the larger what Captain America is and what he means, I totally get where you're coming from. And again, as a huge comic book nerd like yourself, Robert, I completely agree with that sentiment. But as I said, I reckon it with just with the version of Steve Rogers we get throughout the MCU. Right. I just think it's such a lovely grace note to end where we end for him. And but like I said, by all means, it's like we're not going to agree on everything, but it just for me it absolutely struck the right chord.
No, absolutely. No, and I think it's an interesting thing too to mention too, is that in the comic book series, he had a relationship with Peggy Carter back in World War II. It was a very short-lived romance, like it is in the movies, of course.
Yeah.
But and in the movies, it wasn't even a romance at all. It was like unrequited love the entire time. But in the comic books, he eventually does get together with Sharon Carter and has a much deeper, more like basically what we see him have with Peggy in the movies is what he has with Sharon in the comic books. And it's a much deeper relationship. And I totally get that they didn't want to do that in the movies, that Sharon was a character that the audiences, for the most part, from what I've seen, most people just didn't care for her, and I think it was just mostly because everybody really wanted Cap to be with Peggy.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that. It just would have been weird. Like, don't get me wrong though, I'm a kid, I'm a reader from the 80s, and Captain America used to have a relationship with a villain called Diamondback. So
yeah.
So
the 80s were a complicated time, Robert. We all did things regret. Come on.
Yeah. Hey, I actually really liked that relationship they had, because it was a villain who was like trying to become good and everything, because she fell in love with Captain America, and she was inspired by him to turn over a new leaf. Not that and she was kind of like not the baddest villain to begin with, but I'm still hoping we get the Serpent Society at some point. I really want to see the Serpent Society. But,
I'm always
that's a little too comic booky.
I'm always staggered that more villains don't just instantly fall in love with Chris Evans, Steve Rogers when they meet him. I'm not surprised any of them stand against him. I would get lost in those baby blue eyes of his. I would never find my way back.
Absolutely agreed.
I really hope Mrs. Hugh doesn't listen to this podcast. It's all getting very homoerotic, but it is what it is.
That's pretty much why every time you talk about Captain America, it's honestly, pretty homoerotic for you.
He's so dreamy. He's so dreamy. Between that,
I admit, he's a great looking guy. Chris Evans is, top notch, man.
Dude, the scene in is it Winter Soldier where he's holding that helicopter on the roof and those biceps are just rippling. It's like, oh my god. Yes, I could definitely fall in love with that man. It's not a problem at all.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. No, but I agree with you. I think that the character that we have in the movies, that it was fine for him to have that ending. And that's fine. It just, and I know a big part of it is Chris Evans wanted to be done. He enjoyed playing Captain America, but he was done.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so it was time for him to move on, and that's good. I'm glad that both the actor and the character got their in the way they wanted to, and they could move on into the sunset. And hey, now we get the Falcon as Captain America, and I can't wait to see that. So it's
Yeah,
gonna be
I am very excited for that Captain America movie because
oh yeah,
Sam Wilson is a character that I've enjoyed across the MCU, but always felt hasn't really had a fair shake, and I think putting
agreed.
him front and center of a Captain America movie, I've got high hopes, very high hopes.
Absolutely. I just hope they tweak the costume and put a little less white into it.
Yeah,
Because the
yeah.
costume that we got from in the end of the Falcon and Winter Soldier was not it was very comic book accurate, which was great. But let's tweak it a little for the MCU people.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, all that aside, his character is great. I think that Captain America. Again, the three main characters in this, and I talk about like the um three main is Cap, Iron Man, and Thor. They're always kind of they're always the three that are always talked about in terms of who are the ultimate Avengers, the three core Avengers. And those are always the three. And this really is their story of you know getting from where they were at the beginning of this to where they are at the end of this, and their entire arcs. Sure, Thor gets to continue on, but I think this narrative arc with Thor as well is really complete here. And if we didn't get any more Thor, it would have been great. So
we've not had any more Thor that I'm aware of. No, this is it. I've not seen him since. It's very sad.
All right.
I'm sure one day we'll
I
get
like
another
Love and
good
Thunder.
Like I said, Robert, we won't agree on everything, and that's okay. We're allowed to disagree.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, we really haven't talked about Tony much in this. Tony, we talked to let's
see. Can I very quickly ask?
Come back
Just before we talk about Tony, because I think that's going to be a very in-depth conversation.
Yes,
can I just very quickly ask about the other Avenger that we've not really touched on at all, who has a very interesting role in this movie, which is Professor Hulk.
Yes.
Now, I see that there's a lot of dislike for him online.
What?
And I get that. Yeah. There's a real sort of like, Hulk's such a great character in the comics. He's got all these amazing arcs that they can go on and all these different things. And it's like, I think a lot of people are unhappy that he was used as a bit of sort of like light relief, and the sort of the devastating power of Hulk is kind of lessened quite a bit by the way in which he's portrayed in this film. And so I can intellectually understand that disappointment, but I was too busy. I was caught up in the silliness of it all and the fun of it. I thought it was terrific, and his interactions with the Ancient One on top of the roof are magnificent. I mean, I'll not lie. I love Tilda Swinton in that role, and I didn't know at all that she was in this before I went to see it, and it was so exciting. When I knew Hulk was going to see Doctor Stephen Strange, in my head I was like, oh, we're a few years too early for that big guy, and I couldn't believe they got Tilda Swinton back, and they've got that scene on the rooftop is absolutely beautiful. It's so well played out, and she's magnificent, so game. But yeah, what do you think of Professor Hulk? Because I don't get the anger about it.
I don't either. I loved it. I loved the integration. So again, being an 80s reader, that an 80s, 90s, or late 80s, early 90s reader. I read quite a bit of the Peter David run. And Peter David had a long run on Hulk. And he did a lot of good stuff in that, and one of them was a storyline where he integrated the Hulk. And you had the Hulk who was physically Hulk but had Banner's brain and intelligence and everything. And so for me this was like, oh, okay, this is really cool. Like finally this makes sense, and I get that people like the Savage Hulk and love that aspect of him. I always feel like that's and I get that it's about the duality and it's about the struggle and everything. But again, it's like going back to talking about Spider-Man and how all these writers just use it as a crutch, by making, like, giving him the Parker luck and always giving him like the shit end of the stick, and that like nothing ever goes right for Peter. It's like the same people who really want no happiness for Hulk either, and or
Yeah,
for
yeah,
Banner,
yeah.
and just want him to constantly be the man on the run. And I don't get that aspect of it, because that's boring to me. I It's fine to do that once in a while. Don't get me wrong. Have him revert back every once in a while. But like, to have that as status quo just seems weird to me. I think having a version of him that can be integrated, and you get the strength of the Hulk with the intelligence of Banner, is such a great combination. Because sure, you miss out on the man versus the monster aspect of it to a degree, but you still have this character who is monstrous in appearance, but is intelligent and humble, in mind and character. And so I think that aspect makes it more interesting in a lot of ways, than just, that weird struggle the whole time.
Yeah,
It's
and
just,
also there's no real reason why they can't do those storylines in the future. It's like I think a lot of people
yeah,
thought that because they'd done this, it's like, oh, they've ruined Hulk. That's it. So he's like this forever. It's like, guys, if do you not pay attention? Like nothing stays the same. It's like
yeah,
one of the joys of these films is how much they do make efforts to change things up, and there's no reason why you still couldn't see, as you said, like a Savage Hulk storyline or something like that, as something gets unlocked within Banner's brain. Um,
absolutely.
in fact, I think that probably will happen. I think somewhere down the line we'll definitely get a story like that. And also, I mean, Marvel are still kind of hamstrung with this, the fact that they can't do a standalone Hulk movie, So like, there's only so much that they can do if he's going to be not the central character and just be a sort of like peripheral to diminishing a word, but like a sort of like just another part of the ensemble rather than being its own story. I always think there's only so much that they can do, and I think the balance is pretty good here. I think he's very
Yeah,
funny. Like that scene in the diner where he's getting autographs and taking photos with the kids and
yeah,
all that's terrific fun. Um, and like I like that. Even though he is the sort of the fun character in this, he's the one who is the most, well, sort of angry, visceral reaction to Natasha's death, and he's ultimately the one as well who takes on the responsibility of doing the snap. So yeah, no, I think he
yeah.
gets a lot in here. Yeah, it's just not something I can get on board with. I really enjoy Hulk here.
Well, and again, I think that this movie, when you look at all of the core Avengers, Tony, Cap, Thor, Natasha, Clint, and Hulk, you get a completion of storylines. You get them to a resolution of their characters, that if they don't make any more movies with these characters, then you can be satisfied overall with them. I feel that's, yes, I would love to see more, of course, but if we didn't get to see any more of these characters, then I'm okay with that. They
Yeah, that's
get to
fair.
that core, and I think that that's where Hulk is at too. Is that they got Hulk to a point where they were like, okay, well, we've gone through all the Savage Hulk, and having to do the whole, sun's getting low and all this other stuff, trying to figure out these other ways of not controlling him but calming him, soothing him,
Yeah,
and then getting Banner to a place where he can be happy with his status. And that's ultimately where it bothers me when audiences are like, or readers or whatever, are always like, oh well, I like it better this way. Like, that one, that's boring to me to just continue having the status quo. But two, that you want these characters to constantly be in this state of misery. It's the same with what I was saying with Cap. I don't think Cap deserves to continue to be this selfless character who um doesn't have a personal life, and doesn't have a romantic aspect, somebody he can be with and everything. I think that you can do that. And like I said before, in the comic books, he's had many relationships with people, with other women. And, for the last decade plus, maybe 20 plus years now, he's been with Sharon. So
yeah,
so they've had this, they get the characters to that point where they can do that. And so being that Hulk is now happy, Banner's happy now, he's in a place where he can and it doesn't lessen the drama. There's aspects of him, like, he is a huge dude now. Like, you can't tell me that there aren't going to be problems in his life, and that, he's a walking like monster. Sure, he's obviously, in the intervening 5 years, he's gotten popular. Kids are coming up to him. They're not scared of him now, and so, he's like this rock star of superheroes, which is cool for him. Like, as somebody who was hated and feared, and to have that turned on its ear and be able to, I love that aspect. He's still an awkward dude though, doing a dab and everything like that. And the thing, it's just like, it's just so weird and like off-putting in ways. And I love that about it, because it takes that awkward Banner character and puts it in the Hulk's body. And just, I don't know. To me, it's great to see these characters grow and change. This is something that frustrates me with comic books in general, and it's why I don't read a lot of Marvel anymore, is because they started to change things there for a while. Sam became Captain America. We had Jane Foster's Thor, and we're starting to see them in the movies and everything too. We had these new characters taking over for the original characters, and I liked that we were getting this kind of legacy vibe going on with this. And not that they were taking over from the characters, they did kind of for a little while, but then they kind of coexisted with the characters. And I liked that there was this new generation of characters that could take on the mantles and take on these new things. But no, of course, audiences couldn't deal with that, because the large portion of the comic book audiences are people my age, and they can't let go of anything. And so, I'm not one of those. I love comic books that continue to grow and change. One of my favorite comic books is this Image comic book called Savage Dragon. And the original character had a kid, and his kid took over the book. And the original dragon died. And I think that's what's fun and great about it, is now I've got this whole new generation. This comic book's been going on for 30 years now. So this whole generational change with this, and some of my favorite comic books are about change. In the Hellboy universe, Hellboy's dead, the world is ended. Spoiler alert for everybody, go read those comic books. But everything changes, and there's these cycles, and it doesn't change anything. They're still writing Hellboy stories about when he was alive back in the past, so that's great. We're still getting those stories, but now we're starting to get stories about what's happened afterward too. And I love that aspect, and I hope that and that's what's great about the movies, is they're kind of forced to do that in a way, either that or recast. And I don't want them to recast. I think the MCU is doing this great job at just going, we're going to move on. We're going to make different characters, and you're going to be forced to watch them. Hopefully you'll come out and watch them. The audience, the audience is kind of not so great with that.
Don't tell them they're going to be forced to watch them. That never goes well. They will not turn out for that. Yeah,
well, I don't mean you're forced to watch it. You have the choice to watch these. This is what's coming now. We can't go back. Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans, they don't want to come back. So we got to move forward. You got to deal with these new characters, and hopefully you'll be there with us. So I think that's what's interesting about it. And you just like Hugh Jackman moving on from Wolverine. Sure, they can get a new Wolverine, but God, who could they get to play that would be half as good as Hugh Jackman was?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So it's just, for me, like, to see people complain about stuff like the Hulk, and stuff like that. It's just like, but that makes it more interesting. Like, why do you want the old? Embrace the new. I don't know. I'm one of those people who just always likes to like kind of move forward and see what they're going to do next, rather than keeping the status quo. And that's what they did with this movie, was they took all 6 of these characters and gave them a resolution that worked for their characters, got them either to the end of their stories or got them to the next stage. And I think that's what's great and interesting about what they did with Endgame as well. Is it's not just the three, it's not just Tony, Cap, and Thor. It really was all six of them that had their stories, change and resolve and do all this. So
yeah. So no, agreed. I just think, it's we live in a weird sort of nostalgia culture, don't we, where people just constantly hanker for the past. And to be honest with you, I mean, Marvel aren't immune from that. The MCU isn't immune from that, and it's definitely what we're going to be seeing, I think, in upcoming projects, things like Secret Wars, Deadpool 3 that's coming next year. I mean, those films are going to be packed full of little nostalgia fairies, sprinkling nostalgia dust over the current MCU and doing their best to kind of like reignite some of that early spark. So, but I do agree with you. I like the fact that they have tried to kind of move things forward. They've tried to have that kind of momentum to install or to make those characters legacy characters, but right. I think the box office will dictate, how successful that is or isn't. As much as you and I may personally enjoy it, I think the fact that they are recalibrating because of sort of declining numbers probably tells you where they're going. But I'm still very optimistic about it. I mean, I know we spoke earlier about the death of the MCU has been very much exaggerated. I think in the
very
trades.
Exaggerated.
Yeah, I do think that people are in for quite a shock when the X-Men film and the Fantastic Four films launch, and oh right, okay, so it is still quite popular then. Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah, So we've talked about everybody except for the big man himself.
Yes.
Robert, we've danced around this. It feels like we can't avoid it anymore, doesn't it? We need to talk about Tony.
It really does. Yes.
I want a podcast. I'm going to release a podcast called that. We need to talk about Tony. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah. Maybe it could be done by Tony Black. No.
No, Tony. Well, the first 2 or 3 episodes could be done by Tony Black, and
then, exactly.
Then someone else will pick up the slack after that. Tony, if you're listening, love you, man. We love you.
Yes, absolutely.
So Tony Stark in this movie.
Yes.
What a thrilling, exciting, hilarious at times, and also really, really moving performance. I mean, right from the off. I mean, we open the film, which we haven't really spoken about too much yet. We open the film with Tony stuck at the arse end of nowhere in the galaxy, in a ship that's running out of oxygen, food, and hope by the second. And he is lost in the grandest sense of the word, not just like literally, but also existentially. He is irrevocably damaged by what he's been through on Titan. I love when Captain Marvel shows up to get him back home.
Yes,
that whole opening scene is breathtaking, and when he meets Cap again, it just breaks your heart. The first thing he says to Cap when he comes down is like, I lost the kid, and that's something that will haunt Tony throughout this movie. The fact that Peter died in his arms. But it's brilliant. I cannot stress enough. I mean, I always think Robert Downey Jr. always brings a lot to every time he plays Tony Stark. Regardless of what your opinions may be of the individual films, I think as a performance, he always really goes above and beyond. And none more so here. He's so natural with his child, with the little Morgan Stark, and that's something that obviously is a carryover from the way he interacts with the kid from Iron Man 3. Whose name is,
and with how he interacts with Peter,
and Peter, exactly. It's like he's so comfortable with kids because he speaks to them on
his own himself.
Level. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He doesn't talk down to them. He doesn't sugarcoat things. He's very honest with them, and it's lovely. And I know we mentioned this at the start, but it's very true. Like the fact that he has a daughter absolutely anchors the fact that the last 5 years must remain, given what he has. He says that save what we have. I can't lose that, but maybe fix what we lost. And I love it. I love it. And everything, but throughout the entire film makes perfect sense. The ultimate sacrifice to play that he makes is brilliant, because that's, as you said earlier, that's his character arc. The arc that began in that cave in Afghanistan 12 years beforehand is now perfectly paid off. That arc is complete. The guy who would sell his own grandmother, down the river for profit and for success and for fame, has now become the guy who gave his life up to save the galaxy, not just the world, but the galaxy. And
right.
I also love this. They don't hammer it home very much, but I do like that it hangs over the film. In fact, over the last 2 or 3 Tony appearances, is his worry that he's failed or that he will fail. He understands the consequences of that, and this desire that he has to, as he puts it, build the suit of armor around the Earth that he thinks constantly has failed. He gets to see that here in the finale in Portals, because that's what we're seeing there. That is the armor around the world that Tony Stark built. He just didn't know it. He just couldn't see it. If he had never stepped forward as Iron Man, then we wouldn't really have the whole litany of heroes who show up in his aftermath to defend the Earth. And that's his legacy, after he's gone. It's like that's what he's left behind for the world. Yeah, we don't have an Iron Man patrolling, the skies and setting things right, but he has inspired the generation of heroes who will look after the Earth in his absence. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And that, as I said, I imagine we'll end this podcast by talking about Portals and all that entails. But it's just a glorious send off for one of the truly great comic book characters of our times. I think I as much as I'm a Steve Rogers fanboy, he's absolutely my favorite. Even I wouldn't really argue that Tony Stark is the absolute beating heart of the MCU, and it's no surprise that since both he and Steve have come off the board, there has been a little bit of a waning at times. We lost that star power. And I know you mentioned this earlier, and you're 100% right. It was only natural. Anyone who thought that they could maintain that high level after Endgame, it's like you need to take a beat. It might take a few years, step back a little bit, but we need to build. And I actually think that they're quietly going about the building reasonably well, even if some of the projects haven't quite lived up to expectations. I do think that by the time we get to this next Avengers film, that'll be huge. Anyone who thinks that they're going to release an Avengers film that's not going to break $1 billion is out of their mind, because it just is. It just is. The brand is so strong, and the nostalgia for these characters is so strong. Whether Tony and Steve are there or not, people will turn out in numbers for those movies. But yeah, Tony Stark, no notes, just a perfect performance. Really, really love it.
No, and I agree with you. This is the completion of his arc that started in his first movie. And like you said, this whole notion of a suit of armor around the world. He mentions that in Age of Ultron. That's where that idea starts. But it's because of the aftermath of the events of New York in the first Avengers.
Yeah.
When he almost died, got caught in that, on the other side of that wormhole. And that shook him to his core so badly. And you see it mostly in Iron Man 3. But it continued to define who he was until the end. And it was something that he continued to work on. And it was, it was something that, at the end of number 3 of Iron Man 3, that, he destroys all his armors and he tells Pepper, I'm not going to do anything more. And it's like, it's obviously not the truth. Tony cannot stop being Tony. And you see that in this movie too, is that there's that moment where, he's not going to, he didn't want to do the time travel thing. He didn't think it was possible. But then once he sits down and within minutes figures it out, then he's like, okay, it's possible, but what do I do now? Because before, that piece was completely off the chessboard. There was no way of making that work. But once that became a possibility, that literally changed everything for him. And he was like, how can I not do that? And he had to go to Pepper at that point, who was the person who is his balance, who is his grounding. But she knows who Tony is and says, you have to. You can't not do it.
Yeah.
And that's where he goes, you're right, but I want to keep what I have. And that's where he makes that demand, is that, he makes that demand that, yes, I want to give everybody back, but I want to keep what we have. So we can't erase everything, which to a degree is great. And that's fine. And I understand it. But it's also, again, a very selfish thing for him, because over the intervening 5 years, yes, there were a lot of people lost, but there are people who lost people during those 5 years, during the time that they were blipped, so that when they come back, those people are gone. It's people like, and you find out later on, somebody like Monica Rambeau, whose mom was still alive when she left. She had cancer, but she had beaten it at that time, and had then blipped. And then when she comes back, finds out that her mom died 2 years after the blip happened. And so she missed out on that time. And so I think that and I love that the MCU is doing that they go back and they go, these people come back. It was like Yelena also got blipped, came back. And then when she came back, she found out that Natasha had died. And so, it's these moments, these heartbreaking moments. I love that they're doing that, and they're dealing with the consequences of that. They're not just going, okay, everything's fine. No, they go back and they go, here's these moments. Guess what? We're going to fuck you up emotionally. And we're going to make you care for these characters on a level that you didn't think you were going to care about them. And so I love that. But also, again, that just speaks to that selfishness about Tony. And don't get me wrong, it's understandable. Everybody who survived that and went on with their lives and made different changes with their lives, maybe to positive degrees, like Tony did. You don't want to take that away from them also. So it's a very hard decision. I think ultimately it is the right decision in a lot of ways, even though it's a very hard decision to make. It wasn't hard for Tony, of course, but anybody who would need to make that decision would hopefully try to think through the ramifications of all that and just understand just how deeply that's going to mess with people who lost things during that 5 years. And so I get it. Tony is still being Tony in where it comes from, is that there is a selfishness to that, but at the same time, he still does that. Okay, well, I still got to try. I still got to make something to bring back everybody else. I still got to make this work. And it's ultimately how Tony is. And I love that they kept the core essence of this character through every one of these movies. Robert Downey Jr. is the perfect actor to play Tony. I don't think anybody else can. I don't think anybody else should. Sure, 50 years down the line, give me another Tony. But until then, don't touch him. Let that be Robert Downey Jr.'s role for as long as possible, and just let us live with that.
I think you're in for a disappointment then, I'm afraid, Robert.
Oh, I know. I know.
There is no way that they won't do it. And
there's no way they don't reboot it at some point. Yeah. And especially with the variations on the how variants are, that you can have different looking variants. Absolutely, they're going to bring somebody in, and that's how they're going to do it. So,
I honestly think Secret Wars will be the reset, and I don't mean a hard reset. I've always been very firm about that, because I hate when things just get put back to square one. But they'll do the Secret Wars reset that they did in the comics, where it's like, well, everything that happened still happened, but if there's things that we want to change, that's all we need to say is, well, when the universe reset itself, some things were a little bit different. And so, suddenly we've got a new Tony Stark on the scene, or we've got a new Steve Rogers there as well. There's many things that they can do, and I do think that, because Secret Wars, what is it, 2026? I think is what they're talking about just now. So that's 3 years away.
Back. There's no way.
Yeah, it does seem ambitious, doesn't it? So. Let's say tentatively 2027. Okay, so it comes out in 2027. That would be, oh goodness, that'd be almost a decade after this. It wouldn't be too far away from a decade. And I think at that point, 20 years nearly of the MCU, you probably could do a soft reboot and do things a little bit differently. So I will still turn up for these movies, because of course I will.
Absolutely
in their pocket. But much like you, it feels like a bit of a poison chalice taking on some of these characters. But then But then, even when Blade was announced and it was going to be Maharaj Ali stepping in, one of my favorite actors working today, absolutely brilliant. But you do think like, yeah, but Blade was Wesley Snipes, wasn't he? It's like, you're really up against it. No matter how much I may respect and enjoy him as an actor, it's a big ask. So, hey, look, I'm optimistic. I'm keen to see what happens when we get to that point. But I'm like you. I hope it doesn't happen for a while yet. Let me live in a world where Tony Stark's sacrifice meant something huge. Do you know what I mean? Don't just write it off as quickly as you can.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me enjoy that, and that's kind of how it feels, and that's why that ending lands so hard, because it felt like real stakes. It felt like proper end point, and honestly, I cannot stress how wonderful those final moments are on the battlefield. When he runs into Doctor Strange, midway through the fight, and he basically asks him like, "Is this it? Is this the one?" And Strange tells him, "Well, if I tell you what happens, it won't happen." And again, the minute he said that in the cinema, I was like, "Oh no, I know exactly what that means. Yeah. I know exactly what that means." And it doesn't make the ending any less powerful just because it's coming. It's absolutely devastating. Can I also just say, I mean, I take it. Let's move on to Portals, Dave, because we need to talk about Portals, man. We need to talk about it.
You've been itching for it.
Oh man, tell me about it. But just within the context of Portals, obviously, again, guys, you should have seen this by now. But Tony's sacrifice, where he gets the Infinity Gems and he snaps his fingers with his wonderful callback, "I am Iron Man," which I love. That sort of riposte to Thanos' fantastically self-indulgent "I am inevitable," which, by the way, is a classic line. It's so good. And you know that when he saw the replay of that from Nebula's memory banks, the minute he saw it, like, "Oh, I'll remember that. I like that. I'm going to hope we get a chance to see that at some point." I love it. "I am inevitable. I am Iron Man." It's gorgeous. His death is very tastefully handled. I think I like that he gets his sort of quiet moment with Pepper, with Cap, with Peter, and I think it's War Machine as well, isn't it? I think Rhodey gets a very brief goodbye. I think it's beautiful. I really really hate the deleted scene where all the heroes take a knee, because it's too much. It's too big. I think what they do in the scene is gorgeous, and the segue from that to the funeral is heartbreaking. Now, I have to tell you this story. I went to see this movie easily about 6 times in the cinema. Right, I was just if I could have taken some time off work and spent some afternoons with it, I would have done the same. But like anybody who wanted to go see it, I was very much like, "I'm your guy. I'll take you to see it. Let's go see it." But like the third time I went to see it, when Tony died, there was a woman like maybe 2 rows in front of us with her boyfriend, and I kid you not, the sobs and howls and wailing she made. No one knew how to react, but it was kind of wonderful because it was such an open show of emotion, and I don't judge anyone for that, because I get very teary eyed the first time I watched this. I was very teary eyed.
Oh man!
But like
I've become a big baby in the last few years. I cry at like every movie now. It's ridiculous.
But I think there's a difference between I'm the same. It doesn't take much to make me cry. Since I became a dad, actually, I wonder if that's maybe the same for you, Robert. Where I became a dad, it's like now anything gets me really. You can absolutely win me over. But
it's so funny too, because it's literally only been within the last few years for me. Like,
really?
I would get teary eyed before, but now everything just makes me bawl. Like I'm just literally like tears streaming down my face when there's sad moments, and I'm like, "This sucks, man." Well, like, what have my emotions got to be so like? but no, it's good. It's great.
This woman was like wailing, and I'm not using that like in a funny way, like genuinely wailing at the death of Tony Stark, and there was a ripple of laughter, nervous laughter through the audience, and it was kind of welcome because it was so tense. It was also tense. You needed a release of some sort, and I remember coming out of the cinema. My friend and I were chatting about that poor woman, but we were saying, you know what though, what a wonderful job they've done with connecting with their audience, you know, that it means that much to people. You know, a character that they've followed for over a decade, you know, they've turned up for time and time again, watched those movies. I mean, I'm sure, like, you know, I know these movies like the back of my hand. I wouldn't even needed to watch Endgame again before this podcast
Right.
because I can replay it all in my head. I know it so well. But I can't think of another franchise that's been quite as successful as that. Honestly, I mean, like, it gets me every time. I know how many times I watch that, I will be a bit of an emotional mess by the end every time, because I love and have invested so much love and joy in these characters over the last decade and a half that, yeah, I'm all in. And do you know what? See, sometimes I'm aware of this. It does make me a little bit more forgiving than maybe I should be about certain things in the MCU that aren't working. And anyone who listens to my podcast will tell you this as well. I'm very pro Marvel. I'm like, I'm not one of these guys who's constantly looking to, you know, badmouth or looking for the, looking for the flaws constantly. I'm much more forgiving of that, and something I'm very proud of on Podcast 616. I'm all for critical voices, and we've had plenty of people on, as you'll attest, Robert. We've had plenty of people on with differing opinions, and I love that.
Right.
A proper debate, a proper discussion about it.
Yeah.
But I've got no interest in being negative for the sake of being negative, and it's just not, it's not
exactly.
in me. And that woman was kind of indicative of that attitude of, like, people love these films because they love these people and they love these characters. And yeah, that's why I kind of hope that Tony's death does kind of, it needs to stick. I don't mind him showing up in Secret Wars because of the very nature of, you know, the multiverse. I think that's a fun way of doing it. But I want our universe's Tony Stark to remain gone for a long time, because it lessens the moment, I think, if you just have him back within a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the same thing. You know, that's the only reason why I want it, is because I don't want it to lessen the impact of what those moments mean to the audience. Because if you take that away, then when you go back, you're just like, oh, this doesn't mean anything. I know he's going to be alive again later. They're going to bring a different one in, whatever. It doesn't matter. But you know, but I agree with you. Like, I'm a very forgiving MCU audience person. Like, you know, I will pretty much give them a lot of rope in terms of forgiving a lot of the stuff that may not 100% work. Even like I said with Thor: The Dark World, it's not my favorite movie. Really will not. I will rarely ever go back and watch it again, because it's lesser in my eyes. It's still a good movie. I think that it's done well. I think there's things that just don't connect well for me. And it's the same thing with, you know, I like Thor: Love and Thunder. I don't think it's nearly as bad as other people say. It's the same thing with Ant-Man Quantumania. A lot of people didn't like that.
I was going to say, you and I are the founding members of the Ant-Man Quantumania fan club. In fact, we may be the only two members, I think. But I really
I think so. Yeah. And they you know, something like, but on the other hand, I can recognize that Secret Invasion fumbled the ball bad. And there's a lot of reasons for it, though. There's a lot of behind the scenes things that happened, that it's not just a simple it wouldn't have been just a simple fix. There was so much more going on in the background to everything that was going on with that series, that they should have done differently. And so it wasn't any one little thing with that one. It was like a whole bunch of things that should have been handled differently. But you know, but I think overall, most of the Disney Plus shows have been very good. Even something like Moon Knight, where Moon Knight's not a character I typically enjoy. So it was harder for me to even enjoy that series. But that series is good, but it's still uneven. And I think it has to do a lot with the character. The character is kind of difficult. The character itself as a comic book character had a good run in the 80s. But I think even then, that run in the 80s wasn't super invested in the multiple personality aspect as it got into later on. And the comic book series have kind of been like uneven since then too. And so it's just one of those characters that's kind of hard to find an audience and to find good writers and stuff to make it work. But I still think the show is good.
Yeah.
Even if it is a little uneven. But like I said, I give them a lot of rope to entertain me um and to hopefully I would say their hits far outweigh any misses for me. And I think even on a normal scale to anybody looking at Marvel in general, that their hits far outweigh their misses. Even this year, you had Quantumania that underperformed, and you had the Marvels, which way underperformed, but are both fantastic movies. And then you had Guardians of the Galaxy that made over $1 billion. Everybody is saying, "Oh, well, Marvel's dying. Marvel's dying." No, it's not. You had one super awesome movie that just came out this year that made a ton of money, and you had two other really good movies that people just didn't like, or didn't go to, And I think the test of time is going to show that both Quantumania and the Marvels are going to be those movies people are going to go back and go, okay, you know what? They weren't that bad. So
no,
I think that it's going to be something like that. But the getting back to Endgame though, Endgame left us in a place that was going to be very hard to get out of anyway. You had at least 3 members of the Avengers who were taken off the board. 2 by dying and 1 by going back in time and taking himself off the board. Then you had Clint, who was never a rock solid member anyway. And then you had the Hulk and Thor. Thor's now going back off to space, and so you're left just the Hulk there. So you've decimated the team. There's no way, you have the other side people and everything like that. But that's like you said, getting back to the whole thing about the armor around the world and how Tony's legacy is really the heroes of this MCU universe, that you have all these heroes that came in his wake, that, like you said, with the portals, you're getting these portals coming out, and everybody, you see just in that sequence from that point on, you see just the vast amount of heroes that the MCU has, that were working together and helping each other and doing what they need to do to protect the world. And that's where it is frustrating when people are like, oh, well, what are they going to do for the Avengers? I don't know. They got a whole bunch of heroes that are still around from back then. Plus you got new ones like Shang-Chi and, Ms. Marvel and everybody else. So it's like, we got people, don't worry. So,
yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that, Tony's lasting legacy is the fact that he helped inspire, everybody that came afterward. And really and this is where I get back into it, is that it's really Fury's legacy, and Fury should be the main person who gets a lot of these kudos. He's the one who came up with the Avengers idea. He's the one who brought them all together and, and tried to help, be their guide through the early days and everything. And it's such a disappointing thing that Sam Jackson, who is this massive actor who's really good at what he does, has gotten all these little bit parts through all of this, and hasn't gotten as much. And even as much as Secret Invasion, we've mentioned, isn't the greatest, he is so good in that. It's still worth watching just for the moments where he gets to be on screen, because he gets some of the best acting ever in terms of what he's doing for that series. Outside of that, the rest of the series around him kind of sucks, but
yes,
he's doing a fantastic job. So, but yeah, no, I this movie is just, it's so good. There's so much going on. It's the impact, the legacy that it creates after this point that we're still feeling today. There's so much that goes into to everything, and Tony sacrificing himself at the end, that is in keeping with his character. He was a selfish person, yes, but he still would stand up and do what was right. There are many instances where Tony would have been taken off the board earlier than this. Like every time he put himself out there as Iron Man, he could have been gone. And he did that because one, he was partially cleaning up his own messes. And then 2, because just when he would stand up and do the thing that was right in the end. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
who his character is that, and it's the way the character arc has been from the very beginning. You see that when he realizes that his weapons are being used to hurt people, like in the hands of the terrorists, then he's like, no, taking weapons off the board. I realized my mistake, because up until that point, he's like, whatever, I got the weapons, we're selling to the government, whatever, it works. But then he realized that, hey, I got to take these off the board. I gotta fix my mistake. And that's, ultimately where it comes down to is, and then, he gets this moment too. We haven't talked about this either. We talked about Cap seeing Peggy, but he gets to reconcile with his father, which he never got to do. His dad died while he was still young enough that he was still in his rebellious, teenager phase. And so, or young adult phase. And then he gets this moment to finally reconcile in some way with his dad, and actually gets to be the elder, because he's older than his dad is at that point. And his dad's having his mom's pregnant with Tony at the time. He's already got a daughter who's like several years old, 5 years old or whatever. And so he's already this voice of experience, and he gets to be the one to talk to his dad and be able to go, you know what, you're going to be a good dad, and he understands, and he gets to see his dad being like a dad, like feeling like he's going to be like, maybe he's going to mess up, but at the same time, he wants to do what's right for his kid, and being able to see that changes everything for Tony. And that's that part of that resolution that he gets, is that he gets that moment to finally have a conversation with his dad that feels like something where he can move on. And that's great. I like, and again, that just speaks to everything that they're doing in this movie. Like everything else that you're getting in this movie with all this other stuff going on, you get these different arcs of everybody. We haven't even talked about one character that we mentioned earlier, and we'll get to that character in just a second before we finish up. But everybody gets these little arcs that get them to their next stage, or to the end of their stage or whatever. And I love that about this movie. And in addition to all the crazy shit that's going on, the time heist and everything else, which is a great sequence in its own, real quick, because that was so funny. The whole bit with Hulk and all of them trying to do the time thing and bringing back different age versions of Scott was hilarious. And then just somebody peed. I don't know if it was old me or baby me or just me. It's like, I love Paul Rudd. He's so, like, all these characters, there's all these actors, they're so good at these characters. They've been in them for so long. They know these characters backwards and forwards, and it's just perfect. It's just not a single moment in this movie is anything where I would say they were doing anything wrong. Even with my minor quibbles with the Steve Rogers thing at the end. And there's something I want to mention about that as well. But the one character that I was talking about though was Nebula. We didn't really talk about Nebula. How she's kind of the crux of this, because she has this moment where her because of the time travel nature of it, she kind of glitches with her past self, and Thanos and all of them get all the information about what's going on. And that's how Thanos gets to our time. And it messes everything up, but she gets to resolve who she was as a character, and it delivers the death blow to herself, her past self, because she has grown around not only the Guardians themselves, but also along with the Avengers, and has gotten to see, and with Rocket and all these people, and has gotten to see she's gotten to have a family that she didn't have before, with Thanos and Gamora and everything else like that. So she got to have this family and got to grow and change. And so she was just like, when confronted with this past version of herself who would not grow or change, she's just like, it's not worth it, just take her out. So and I love that way of kind of dealing with yourself also, is like, I don't got time to deal with this past negative version of myself. I need to grow. I've grown. I've changed. I need to just get on with it. And that was a great, like, kind of metaphorical way of getting her to that space. And I thought that was very interesting, the way they did that.
Yeah, I think using her to kind of bring like 2014 Thanos into play again was really clever, because that was my concern as the film was going on. Like, Thanos is clearly going to come back, but how? I don't really get it. And it's a very clever idea to have, the sort of the past version of Nebula get mixed up with the present version of Nebula, and that's how Thanos realizes that actually he's already won. He's already completed his life's goal. He will get there, and now he's got a shortcut to get himself there quicker by just traveling to where the Avengers have handily assembled the stones for him. I think it's a really great idea, because I am now going to talk about portals, because that's where we are. I'm going to talk about it.
Yes.
So Thanos in this film doesn't really have the same sort of narrative arc or depth that he has in Infinity War, which I've always argued that's Thanos' movie. That's, if you're looking for the main character, it's Thanos. That's who the main character is. And we're watching the world react around him. But in this film, he is reduced a little bit, and he becomes a little bit more one note. Maybe the subtlety of his plan is lost, because he does make the leap from I'll obliterate half of all life to everything's going pretty quickly. He does kind of jump to that, which then makes it maybe shows how much of a hypocrite he was in the first place. You really need to question what he was ultimately planning. However, that is the choice that he makes, and then so that brings us. He arrives in 2014. We get that wonderful showdown between Cap, Tony, Thor, and Thanos himself, which is great because it just shows you how powerful he is, that he can hold off the three strongest Avengers single-handedly, quite handily kicks the shit out of them, which I really like. I think it's a really great idea to kind of,
although we do have the one moment where, and it's one of the greatest moments in this movie, like in a movie filled with the greatest moments, and like we said about fan service and stuff like that, we get the hammer, Cap picking up the hammer. It's just, and I hope I didn't undercut you. Sorry. I just
you absolutely did, but please continue.
Good. No, it's just like, it's such a wonderful moment because they are getting their asses handed to them.
Yeah.
And they are on the ropes. I mean, he's literally about to kill Thor with Thor's new hammer. And you see the hammer rise, and you're just like, okay, he's calling Mjolnir to him. And then, like, because that's what we're meant to think. And then when it's like Cap has it, and he's just like, and just the elation in Thor's eyes, because when this previously happened in Avengers Age of Ultron, when Cap slightly nudged it a bit, and Thor saw that, and Thor was the only one to see that, he was scared. There was fear in his eye that somebody else was worthy enough to hold that, but this time it was different. And he was so excited that Cap could hold the hammer. And, it just was, it was such a fantastic moment. And like, I went on opening weekend. I go on opening weekend to any of these movies, usually opening night. And the audience went fucking wild when that happened. I mean, it was nuts. It was so great. Everybody was cheering. It was like, I can't tell you, because like, I'm not a big person who really cares about going to movies with big audiences and having that audience experience, because I'm focused on the movie, and sometimes the audience experience can be detrimental to that, because when people are cheering and stuff like that, if the movie doesn't know well enough that they're going to have cheering and stuff like that, and they don't give you a pause, then it kind of ruins it when you can't hear what's going on. It's happened a few times to me where I get frustrated with that. But this was one of those moments where it was just like, it was so, electric that, that you were feeling that, and everybody else was feeling it. Everybody's so excited for that moment. And sorry, I undercut you.
It's all right. No, it's absolutely glorious, isn't it? It is one of the absolute keys to the film, because Yeah, Portals is kind of packed full of little tiny fan servicey moments, and I have no issue with that because it's handled so well for the most part. The when all the sort of the female heroes show up, it is a little bit heavy handed, and I was all for it. I thought it was great and it was fun in the moment, but every time I revisit, I think it's a little bit clunky. You could have tried a bit harder.
It's great. It's great in the first time you watch it, and especially with everything going on, and you get that moment, and they're like, "No, she has help," and everything like that, and it's like it's so good, and you're like, "Yes," and but then after that, every other time you're just like, "Okay, can we move on now? Like, why would they all stop right now and do that? Come on, move." So but is
but I mean,
I agree with you. It's a little weird.
Everything from the moment that one of my favorite scenes in the film is just before the portals open, and it's that shot of Cap standing there with his broken shield, and the armies of Thanos have just arrived. Like, things aren't bad enough, now the armies are here, and it's just this endless sea of monsters, and it's just, oh god, there's no way out of this. And the film does such a great job of making you forget that we just had Hulk do the snap to bring everyone back, because the minute that happens, you get no time to enjoy the moment, because the second it happens, Thanos unleashes hell on the compound. So you're so concerned for these characters and who's still alive and what's happened, where's the aftermath, that you do forget for a second that they're back. And Cap standing there against I want that as a picture. I want that on my wall. It's gorgeous as he stands there, on his own, and he tightens the shield around his wrist, which is split open. He's got a big gash on his forearm.
Yeah.
And you just know that he's right. It's Cap. He's gonna do what he can, but he knows this is it for him, that he'll go out here, but he's gonna go out fighting. He's gonna do his best. And then you get the sort of the crackle static in the radio, and you hear Sam's voice, and then suddenly you get the on your left. And it gives me goosebumps even saying it out loud. It's beautiful. I mean, and the score as well that accompanies the portal scene is unbelievable. It's so moving. It's so well put together. It just makes everything. The portal scene on its own is very good, but the music elevates it to something a little bit more special than it already is. And then we get the return of our heroes one by one. The late great Chadwick Boseman comes through with Shuri and the gang, and then Peter comes back, and Doctor Strange returns. It's all gorgeous, and it's all punch the air joy, and just the armies of Asgard and the wizards, and again, 10 years of building a cinematic universe to give us something like that is so special. And I don't think it's ever been replicated. I don't think anyone else has put the effort into kind of building their universe the way that Marvel have. So I just don't think there's anyone else that could do it as of yet. Kind of cautiously optimistic about James Gunn's prospects over at DC, because he's a creative voice that I really enjoy. So I kind of hope he maybe does something like that. I
want to believe in James. No, I agree with you. I want to believe in James Gunn's ability to do that. And I think that given enough free reign, that he can do that. I think the problem is that you've got somebody who's you got David Zaslav there controlling things, and he is a massive
asshole. Was he asshole?
Tool,
as well.
He's already deleted Batgirl and some other things that have just been like I have no faith in anything potential coming out from them. Until it comes out, I will just wait. Again, I'm not the biggest DC fan, so it's not really that big of a deal. But there are I loved Blue Beetle. I'm glad that actually made it to the screen. But it's there's so many other things that just coming down the pipe that I'm a little bit concerned whether or not even the Superman movie. Honestly, who knows if that will even come out or not based on what's happened so far. So I don't have any faith in anything. And plus with like you said, nobody else is going to be able to do what Marvel's done. Nobody else has the patience and the time really to put into that.
It's also about restraint, and it's something that a lot of studios just don't realize. Like, it would have been so easy to give us so many of the moments that we get in this portal scene earlier in the run, because we all wanted, you want to see Steve lift the hammer, it's like the minute that you watch that happen in Age of Ultron, you then spend, what is it, like 6 years waiting for the payoff to that. It's coming because they've set it up and they've done a great job of making sure that that it's coming as well, so that when they pay it off, you lose your mind. Or even, at as everyone's emerged from the portals, and we finally get, after 12 years, Cap finally says, "Avengers assemble," and we mentioned that earlier at the start of this podcast about 15 years ago when we started doing it, Robert, that that we couldn't wait to hear them say it, because they just about say it in Age of Ultron, and then they cut the credits before we get it. Again, a studio with less confidence would have given you that maybe in the first movie. Let's squeeze everything we can in here, guys. They held stuff back. They gave us a bit of reserve. The battle itself, again, people criticize it. I think I've seen a few criticisms because it's a little bit chaotic, and it does suffer from the sort of, but it suffers from the sort of like, well, it's a bit grey and a bit, it's not maybe the most visually inspiring, and I think that's a fair criticism. But there's so many great things going on in it that I like. The mad dash across the battlefield to get the gauntlet to safety is brilliant, as it goes from T'Challa to Peter to Captain Marvel. All that stuff's great. We mentioned when all the female heroes show up to save Peter Parker, it doesn't quite land for me perfectly. Although every time I watch it, I grin like a goofy buffoon from ear to ear when Peter's lying in the crater and Carol shows up, and you're like, I'm Peter Parker. It's like, hi, Peter Parker.
Hi, Peter.
It's just, it's like that's lifted straight from like the page of a comic. That's what I want. I love it. Yeah. And then my personal favorite moment across the battle is Wanda scaring 7 shades of shit out of Thanos all by herself as she just rips them to bits. And again, it does make you think, oh god, see if she'd have been there at the start, she'd have just ended this very, very quickly, because she's so powerful. And obviously, we go on to see a little bit more from Wanda in the coming projects and films. But honestly, one of my all-time favorite moments in the entirety of the MCU is watching her just take him apart. It's, he's so terrified that he tells his forces to just unleash everything you've got on this one location. We need to stop this woman.
Between her and Carol, that's the thing. Carol and her nearly take him out both times. Yeah. And it's only by providence that he manages to get out of it. But I love it. These two women are the most powerful beings in the entire MCU. And so it's crazy.
There's that great scene, like you said, when Carol comes to the rescue at the end, where Thanos is trying to fight her and he just headbutts her as hard as he can, and there's just no reaction, not even like a reaction that it's happened. For a minute there, you almost think, did he miss? What happened there? But she's just so powerful that it doesn't mean anything to her. And like the way that he uses the power throw, I think it's just a great idea. Where he takes the gem off the gauntlet and puts it in his other hand to punch her across the battlefield. All that stuff's so clever, and again, it all pays off. I was really excited about Captain Marvel, and remain so, because I'm a huge fan of the Marvel film. I think it's great. But this was it was just so exciting to see how powerful she was, and her and Wanda being the sort of like by a distance the most powerful people on the battlefield was a great decision, and it got me really excited about what was coming next, and it they paid that off to some extent, I think. And that we've talked about it already, but the final moments where Thanos thinks he's got the upper hand, he's got the gauntlet, he's got all of his he's got the gems, and he snaps his fingers impotently and nothing happens. It's gorgeous. Honestly, a perfect ending to that battle. I love it so much.
Yeah. And this is what was interesting about watching it with the commentary this time too, because they were talking about there was something you mentioned that I remembered that they talked about. What was it?
I did mention a lot. I was on.
You did. It's all right. But they did mention, like, as soon as, like, because I think there is some confusion in the audience about how Tony managed to get all the gems away, and everything like that. And it's because it was made with one of his gloves. They mentioned it's just nanites. The nanites move it over to his suit whenever he's touching the glove. It's just
Is it not named that actually? Is it not called the Nano Gauntlet? Is that not where they kind of they daub it? I'm pretty sure that's right, or something
yeah,
like
I'm
that.
sure they
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and then there was something else. Oh my gosh, because it was something important that was like they talked about. Maybe it was the Wanda thing. I don't remember, but they did say that, bringing her in, like that that was the moment where you bring her in, and that um he nearly gets taken out. And so, yeah, I mean, you have these characters, and this is the interesting thing with like somebody like Carol. Carol, the only time we've seen Carol in between these movies was in her own movie, but that was back the set in what, 94, at the beginning of her powers. She has now had, at this point, nearly 30 years with these powers. And so she is probably the most experienced hero with her power set. And just to have her come blazing in like that and just taking things out. I mean, it had to take an Infinity Stone to knock her down, but not out. And so that's what's crazy about the situation, is just that you have somebody who's as powerful as Carol who just shrugs it away. And if and then just knowing that if she had been on Earth, if Fury had called her beforehand, but Fury didn't know what was going on, and because you see that at the end of Infinity War, by the time things are happening, they're starting to get news stuff about what's going on in Wakanda just before the actual snap happens.
That's right.
And they start to all disappear. And so they have no clue what's going on until that moment. So he has no time to call Carol there. And luckily he manages to get the signal out before.
One of the really fascinating things about where we stand right now in the MCU is that they have you just mentioned there, it's a shame that Carol wasn't on Earth. Well, it's fascinating that we now are at a point in the MCU where they seem to be assembling a lot of the heroes on Earth, don't they? They seem to be moving a lot of them back. Like we've got Star-Lord was the big one from Guardians, is now Earth-based. Carol ends the Marvels back on Earth as well. It does feel like they're putting the building blocks in place for whatever's coming next. This is another thing, not to take us off tangent, because I know we've gone very, very long. But it's one of the things I love here about people when they talk about, I don't really see them building. It's like, well, you're not paying attention, guys, because
you're not paying attention.
Yeah, you really aren't, because there's a lot of things that they're putting in place that, they're not. It's not upfront. It's not very loud about what they're doing. But if you're paying attention to what they're doing, they're clearly putting people in places where they need to be, in order to take on what's coming next. And obviously it does look like we're still heading towards the Kang dynasty. I'm really excited about that. Like when you look across the current state of the MCU and where everyone has landed, like we are kind of stacking the decks again for Earth and getting the sort of the mightiest heroes back where they need to be, to be prepared for whatever comes next.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing with, if anybody's surprised at the ending of the Marvels with Miss Marvel with Kamala, then you weren't paying attention. And you also maybe you didn't know the comic books. And to be fair, that's fair. But anybody who knows the comic books and knows the characters that have been popping up, that this is no surprise that she's assembling what is effectively the Young Avengers. I really do hope that they don't go with the Young Avengers name, and that they end up going with her team's name, which was the Champions. That would be a much cooler. I think that would be a much better angle on that. But
I also think they won't
most of the team is going to be comprised of Young Avengers. So
but they won't want to muddy the waters with the Avengers IP either. Well, I think the Avengers have to remain its own thing. So I agree with you. I think the Champions is probably the best way forward for that. And hey, I will be there day one to watch that. And, I'm very excited to see what that team looks like when all's said and done. That'll be exciting.
Oh, I'm excited. There's so many things coming down the pipe, like you said, that new Captain America movie, the Thunderbolts. That one's one that I'm super excited about. That team is just, it's so interesting. It's like an interesting team that they're gathering together for that. So it's be pretty crazy. And I've heard rumors that it's supposedly, and it's rumors and nothing firm, but people are talking about, because everybody's been bitching about, well, what happens about the Celestial sticking out of the water? Why has never mentioned that? Well, how do you know they haven't mentioned it? It's just off screen where you're not Nobody's talking about it on screen. But yeah, apparently it's possible some of the storyline might revolve around that. So.
Oh, that'd be really cool. I've always just figured that eventually that would end up as the Avengers headquarters, because they've done something similar
like it
that
does
in
in
the
the
comics.
movie, or in the comics, yeah.
Yeah, it's like that's just what I thought. It's like, we're setting that up, and we'll go when we get the next Avengers movie. That's when we can address that. Like, people are just I know the Eternals was a few years now, right? But like, they can't address everything all of the time. Some things you just have to wait until they've got time to address it. So yeah, again, Robert, we're not the best people to be sitting here and like talking about the criticisms,
right.
Because every time I hear one of the criticisms, I just think, well, no, I've got like a dozen reasons why that doesn't bother me. It's fine. I'm happy to see what comes. And if some things don't pay off, then they don't pay off. It's fine. It's an experiment that didn't quite work, but
yeah. I mean, there's still things. There's still things from the past movies that they hinted at that has never paid off. So it's just like they play a long game. Number one. And that was kind of what I was talking about. That's what I was going to mention, was the thing about how the Avengers assemble and everything happened. The writers and the directors in the commentary actually mentioned that, was that they wanted to extend that out because they knew everybody was going to want it, but they wanted to do it at the right moments. And that's even with him saying Avengers assemble in the way he did. They needed to undercut it a little bit, because he doesn't yell it. He just Avengers assemble, and so it's perfect the way they did it. And it's great that sure, they made us play the long game on that and wait for those moments, but it was worth it. And I think they made the right decisions on that. Did they make the right decisions all along the way? Not necessarily, but I think that getting to this point, the Endgame is like the best movie that we got, putting all the pieces together. And like we said, with anybody else trying to make a cinematic universe, you have to play that long game. You have to play the little pieces in the beginning and build. You can't go to Endgame immediately, because that completely undercuts any interest people are going to have on any of the other things. Nobody's going to care about your characters if you didn't make us care about them up till that point. And so that's all of these multiple movie universes that people are trying to create. That's why they don't work. So I think something like the new Legendary Godzilla universe is doing it right. They're building, and we got the new Monarch TV series on Apple Plus, and that's really good, and it really gives you a lot of that history of that organization that's kind of just in the background most of the time in these movies. So I think they're kind of doing the right way in a lot of ways. So, but
I think, to go back to what I said right at the very start of this, Robert, is that this film is a magic trick that shouldn't work, but it absolutely does on every level and every measurable metric for enjoyment. For me personally, it hits everything. It's exciting. It pays off years worth of storylines. It gives me satisfying character arcs. It's got gorgeous fan service moments. It has heartbreaking finales, and it has, for me, the greatest final scene or final shot in the entire MCU, when we go out on that kiss with Peggy and Steve dancing. It's if you'd have told me like that's how it would end like a couple of years before it came out, I wouldn't have believed you, because it's almost too perfect an ending. Do you know what I mean by that? It's like,
right.
It's kind of what I would have done if I had my brother. I'd said for years that I'd always wanted that ending for Cap, but to have the courage to do a big, massive blockbuster movie like this, the biggest movie ever made, right? To have the guts to end it on such a beautifully quiet, romantic shot. It's like, that's the confidence of a studio and of a creative team who know their audience. And it's like, people are gonna, I left the cinema like tears in my eyes at the end of that, because it's such a beautiful payoff to that, and I was so happy to see those characters reunited. And it's brilliant. I mean, the final song that plays out over the credits is gorgeous as well. Like, just the whole thing's just, what a great ending. And then of course you get your is it Star Trek 6 the Undiscovered Country sign off, where the main Avengers all get their signatures up on the big screen. It's so wonderfully silly and cheesy, but I think it's terrific.
Yeah, and it's a nice send off for everybody to, and it's something to show, like, these are the six that started it all. And this is where we came full circle to this point. And it's silly and it's weird, but it works for, again, it's everything that works about it. It shouldn't, but it does. And it's just, no, you hit the nail on the head right there, because this movie should not work. This whole cinematic journey should not have worked. Anybody else who had done it would have failed, and everybody else who has tried to do it has failed. And just the fact that Kevin Feige has managed to shepherd this whole way. And really, when you look back on it, the MCU is Kevin Feige's project. It's everybody else is in service to his ultimate storylines. Like, sure, they come up with the storylines and everything like that, but he's all like, this is how it's got to fit in. So, and so they've got to do the things that he wants them to do. And so ultimately, success or failure, it all comes down to him. And he's, regardless of how you think about it, and you've got superhero fatigue and everything like that, I understand it. Don't get me wrong. I really do absolutely understand it, but you cannot deny what he's done with this, with this series. And he's pulled it off amazingly, and I can't believe it. And it's awesome. So, and I'm still along for the ride, forever and always. So
no, as I said, I'll be there opening night for pretty much any movie that comes out, and I will eat up any television shows that they put out as well, as long as they're not as terrible as Secret Invasion was. But that is genuinely the only big misstep for me. Obviously, they haven't made Thor 4 yet, so we'll see what that's like when it comes out one day. But yeah, apart from that, all good.
Yeah. No, see, for me, there's been no missteps yet. It regardless of anything, like I would say, even, post Endgame, I would think the only one for me that really didn't fully connect with me is the Eternals, but they don't connect with me in general anyway. So that one was kind of like, I mean, I can take it or leave it. It was interesting, but I'm okay if they don't ever appear again. So,
I'll just keep checking my inbox, Robert, for my invite to the Thor Love and Thunder recording that will be going on. I'm looking forward to that. That'll be good.
Let's see. I might already have somebody for that one, but let me see. I'm not against having somebody on who didn't love it. So,
dude,
I do not have anybody so far. So there you go.
I would be killing your buzz if you have me on. I would just honestly.
No, and I think it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on it, because number one, I've only seen it once. Okay.
Okay.
And so I've only watched the one time. I own it though, and I do plan on rewatching it, especially for the podcast. But I remember enjoying it. Did I enjoy it as much as Ragnarok? No, it's definitely a much different movie. I think that, and let's do a little mini episode at the moment, but because I think that what ends up happening is that Thor Ragnarok was a different movie. Thor Ragnarok was a movie written by somebody else, and Taika Waititi came in and put his stamp on things and tweaked it and made it slightly his own. But at the end of the day, it was still somebody else's work that he was working off of. And that with Thor Love and Thunder, it was solely his own. And he has come out multiple times before and after this movie and basically kind of like, not really shit on it, but he basically comes off as, I don't care about this. And when you look back on it, you can kind of feel that in a lot of ways. He was throwing as much in there as Goofy and everything. But again, you have to remember, Feige's still the guy behind the controls of everything. So sure, he got away with a lot of weird shit and everything like that, but Feige was still in control of everything and still had to approve everything. And so I would still say, if you go back into that movie and watch it, and I don't know how many times you've watched it.
3 times, Robert.
Okay. And I'm sure you'll never like it, but there are probably aspects of it that you do like, that you do appreciate, that could have been a better movie in there.
Yeah, but I came out of the first viewing at the cinema, and I was thinking, I remember I did a podcast on it. So it wasn't 616, I don't think, but I recorded a podcast on it. My attitude was very much like, it's all right. There's some good things in it. It's all right. And then the longer I sat with it in my head, I was like, I don't actually think I liked it as much as I thought I did. So I revisited it at the cinema, and I came out the second time thinking, yeah, that's not a good film. And then like, a few months had passed, and I thought I'll give it another go now that it's dropped on Disney Plus. And yeah, there are things in it that I enjoyed. There are a couple of moments, but it's the sheer heavy-handed Taika Waititi-ness of it all that I can't stand.
And I think Korg, that's the thing.
Yeah,
about
Korg being promoted to like such a pivotal character, such a large character, was just egregious and self-indulgent in the worst imaginable ways. And like, I don't mind undercutting the pomposity and seriousness of the MCU and the way it takes itself sometimes, which Ragnarok gets just about right. You know, the tone of that's just sort of self-deprecating enough. There's a feeling that it's almost embarrassed to be an MCU film at times.
Yeah.
And, you know, it undercuts things that it shouldn't be undercutting. Like there's an ice cream store on New Asgard, which is like the Infinity Cones, and it's all, you know, like all these jokes. It's like, no, like if we're taking this world even remotely seriously, are you telling me the people of New Asgard would be like building a Thanos themed restaurant? You know, given the fact that he wiped out half their people, destroyed, that'd be like going to Austria and visiting like Hitlerville. You know, let's go to Hitlerville. It's lovely. It's like, no, and again, look, I know that's me taking it to a ludicrous extreme, but just to illustrate a point that nothing in that film feels of any consequence. There are moments, there are things like Russell Crowe's wonderfully silly portrayal of Zeus. I think it's gloriously funny. And again, self-indulgent, but maybe in the right ways. I just, egregious is the word I would use over and over again for that film. But yeah, I may revisit it at some point. And my kids and I were doing a big rewatch just now. So we just finished watching the first Avengers movie. So we're kind of breaking for Christmas films now. We'll go back to it in the new year. But yeah, in the new year, it's on the list. It'll be there. I'll definitely rewatch it, and I'll let you know what I think. If I send you any abusive messages, I do apologize. It's not me. It's the Taika talking. Sorry,
exactly.
You've wound me up now, Robert. I'm sorry. Just while we're talking, I love the films of Taika Waititi generally. Boy and Hunt for the Wilder People in particular. Hunt for the Wilder People might be in my top 20 films of all time. I love it. It's a joyous movie with one of my favorite Sam Neill performances. It's a beautiful film. It's probably the best way of describing it. And you know, Shark versus Eagle is great as well. What We Do in the Shadows is one of the great comedy films of the last 30 years, and I will have no argument with people on that. It's glorious. So I'm coming at this from like, I'm a big Taika fan, and I love what he did with Ragnarok. I just felt that everything in Love and Thunder just like, it kind of just rubbed me up the wrong way, you know. And I think what you said is true. I don't feel like he gave a rat's arse about that film.
Yeah, that's ultimately where I think he comes at it from, was that he did the first one, and it's recently come out, and people were like, oh my god, you know, because he admitted he did the first Thor for money. He needed the money. And he did it for money, which is fine. It's a job. Like, everybody who got like butthurt about it, it's like, he did a great job, whether you think so or not. Ragnarok is up there in terms of like great movies. To me, it's one of my top favorites of the MCU because it just does everything I like. But doing Thor Love and Thunder, I think he got to the point where, sure, I'll do it for the money, but I have no love for this character or anything else going on in it, you know. And so I'm just going to make it as silly and weird as much as possible. I'm going to see what I can get away with. And he got away with a lot, you know. So, and it's fine. It's a movie, you know. I liked it on my first and only watch. I'll go back and rewatch it and see how I feel about it. And I may come back. I liked Star Wars: The Phantom Menace the first time I watched that. It was upon more viewings later that I figured out my error. So, you know, that may be the same with this one as well. So, but yeah,
there's a bit of me hopes that's not true though, because it would be nice to know that someone else whose opinion I respect loves it. You know, it's like then becomes like, right, that's fine. Maybe it's my issue, but that's fine. I can accept that. But
exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, all that being said, I think we're pretty much done. Unless you have anything else you want to say about Endgame.
God, no. You know what? Do you know, in all seriousness, Robert, I could talk to you really for about another 2 hours on this.
Oh yeah,
without breaking sweat. I've got so many things that I could go in depth on, but no, I think we've exhausted it pretty thoroughly. Just again to say that Love this movie. It's as I said, sometimes it's my number one film, sometimes it's in my top 5. It kind of jumps around. To be honest, it tends to get closer to the top when I see it. When I watch it again, I think I always remember how great it is. You go, all right, it is the best one.
Absolutely agree.
Thank you so much for having me on to talk about it, because it's been a real joy to kind of geek out over over this movie. It's so good.
Oh yeah, no, this has been a great time, even though it's been a long time. So
a long time.
We will go ahead and spare our audience the rest of it, and you can go ahead and let people know where they can find you online.
You can get me at Angry Scotsman 81 over on Blue Sky and Twitter. You'll also find that's where I'll do all my promotions for all my bits and pieces, Robert. So that we mentioned at the start, but I'm the co-host of a Marvel podcast called Podcast-616. Which I co-host with the lovely Ashley Thomas, the nerdy blogger. So we've always got lots of great stuff coming up there. We're about to when's this go out? Sorry, Robert, is it?
This will be coming out. I believe this week.
Oh,
no, okay. next week. Next week.
All right, that's fine.
The December 15th.
We're building up. We're going to be doing some coverage for What If. We'll be covering those, not episode by episode, because I do want to enjoy my Christmas. But we will be covering them in early January, and we're also gearing up for Echo as well. We're going to cover that in 2 tranches, I think, because they're dropping it on one day. We have got some great guests. I don't want to spoil just now, but we've got a couple of Indigenous writers who are going to come on and talk to us about Echo. So I'm really excited for that. Very and then over on Vampire Videos, we're just about to release our Christmas special, where I think I can tell you this, but Dan won't shout at me. We're going to be covering the absolutely brilliant Count Magnus adaptation that the BBC did about 2 or 3 years ago, directed by Mark Gatiss. So it's a Christmas themed vampire movie. Short. It's about an hour long. It's an old M.R. James story, and it is gloriously good. It's very, very, very good. Keep your ears peeled for that, folks, and check us out.
Definitely. Yeah, those shows are both very great. I've been on both. Very lucky to have been on them both a couple of times now. So definitely go check them out, and I may be on both of them again soon. So
you tease.
So I know. So if you like what I do here, go check out those shows also. Because 1, I've already been on them, and 2, I might be on them again. Because Hugh is a very, very nice guy and lets me come back. But yeah, no, thank you again. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you, giving me all this time to explore this wonderful movie. And I'm sorry to the audience who's having to listen to this. I think now 3+ hours of us gushing over this movie.
Yeah, of our wonderful critical insights, Robert. Don't apologize. They'll be grateful. Exactly. They'll be delighted to hear all these amazing thoughts that we've got. Absolutely. No one has ever been so original when talking about Endgame before than you and I have been here.
Exactly. We just ripped it apart,
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it very much. And I know you'll be back on sometime soon.
Yeah. Excellent. Cheers, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks again to Hugh for joining me. On Monday, Violet Hammond returns to the show to complete my vampire series with Bram Stoker's Dracula and Interview with the Vampire. And on Friday, Donna is back for the epilogue of Phase 4 with Spider-Man Far From Home. Thanks for listening. Creepy and Geeky is a part of the Morbidly Beautiful podcast network. Please check out morbidlybeautiful.com/podcasts for more great shows. If you like what you've heard, please consider giving the show 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, please share the podcast on social media to help spread the word. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. Music for the podcast is Gratitude, composed by Jerry Smith. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and Blue Sky, and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more on TeePublic or by donating to the coffee page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.